Good morning and welcome to this public meeting of the Consumer Product Safety Commission to consider the realignment and mid-year review of the fiscal year 2025 operating plan. I want to thank staff for joining us today and for their diligent work in developing these policy recommendations that the Commission will hear about today. CPSC has the benefit of clear direction from Congress about our funding level for the remainder of the fiscal year. In March, Congress and the President provided funding through September, holding CPSC at an appropriation level of $151 million. The Commission also has the benefit of clear direction from President Trump, who has made government efficiency a cornerstone of his administration's policies. This mid-year briefing has traditionally been an opportunity for the Commission to prioritize expenditures, identify savings opportunities, and to realign the agency's spending with current fiscal reality. A lot has changed since the Commission first approved its FY25 operating plan the day after President Trump's historical victory. Since that time, American consumers have seen the convening of the 119th Congress with new majorities in both chambers, the inauguration of the 47th president, and more than 100 days of President Trump's leadership. And CPSC has renewed its focus on our core mission. For example, the Commission terminated all DEI offices and initiatives, choosing instead to focus exclusively on the safety of American families. I moved to reassign staff from CPSC's Office of International Programs to end wasteful trainings for Chinese manufacturers and to level the playing field for responsible domestic firms by ending this special treatment. The Commission is focused now more than ever on the continued threat to Americans from the People's Republic of China and the dangerous consumer products flooding our market from that country. Chinese goods account for approximately 33% of imported products under CPSC's jurisdiction, but represent more than 75% of the violative products identified by CPSC inspectors at import. We are a leaner, more muscular agency, and we're just getting started. At the same time, CPSC is outpacing key safety and performance metrics from recent years. This agency, under President Trump, is on track to process more recalls and interdict more dangerous and violative foreign goods at the border than it did under both the Biden administration and when CPSC was under Democrat leadership between 2019 and 2021. The mid-year proposal, on which we're about to be briefed, is an important step to continue this progress. This is an opportunity to provide responsible stewardship of taxpayer resources, to restore confidence in CPSC as a trusted authority, and to execute on our mission, prioritizing the safety of American families over the divisive policies of the last 4 years. In a moment, I will turn the meeting over to staff so that they can brief us. Once they've had an opportunity to complete the briefing, each commissioner will have up to 10 minutes to ask questions of staff with multiple rounds as necessary. As a reminder, if you have questions that address the agency's legal authority or other legal advice, please don't ask them at this time. We can hold a closed executive session at the end of the briefing upon request. In addition, the meeting has been noticed under the Government in the Sunshine Act. As always, the Commission is required by law to confine remarks and questions to the scope of the meeting notice, which is the consideration of and prioritization of projects to be funded by potential unexecuted balances if they occur. Briefing us today are Brian Lorenz, the Executive Director of CPSC, and Casey Waith, our Acting Chief Financial Officer. Thank you both for being here today. In addition, we have staff available to answer specific questions about various programmatic offices. Thank you also for all being here today. Mr. Lorenz and Ms. Waith, please begin.
Good morning. Good morning, Acting Chairman Feldman, Commissioners. We appreciate the opportunity to provide an overview of our recommendations for mid-year spending. This is no ordinary year. The spike in CPSC funding that resulted from the American Rescue Plan Act has been largely exhausted. We are just past the first 100 days of a new administration that is committed to protecting American citizens from hazardous products while also driving more efficient, effective, and economical delivery of government service. This change presents an opportunity for CPSC to innovate, including using technology to deliver more efficiently than ever before. Based on operational savings achieved during the first half of the fiscal year, the Commission is in a position to fund new projects during the second half of the fiscal year. Our highest recommended priority for mid-year is associated with our core mission to identify hazardous products so that we can take action. The National Electronic Injury Surveillance System, NICE, collects data on consumer products related injuries in the U.S. For 25 years, the Center for Disease Control has shared costs through an interagency agreement. However, due to their funding shortfalls, the CDC cannot contribute for the remainder of the fiscal year, and there is no commitment in future years as well. While it would cost $1.8 million to address the gap in CDC funding for the remainder of the year, we face the real possibility that we might have a funding gap of $3.6 million in FY 2026. CPSC must consolidate its information management platforms and look for innovative ways, including the use of artificial intelligence and robotic process automation, to collect and analyze injury data. It is imperative that we not postpone. Other important priorities have been identified for the National Product Testing and Evaluation Center in Rockville, Maryland, including replacing the aging HVAC system and providing new equipment for lab safety operations. Cybersecurity operations cannot be minimized. We recommend strengthening CPSC's incident support response, vulnerability management program, cybersecurity monitoring, data loss prevention, and cloud-based security. The investment in upgrading privileged access software will ensure continued support, security, vendor support, and alignment with federal standards. Without this upgrade, systems could become more vulnerable to cyber threats, risking data integrity and operational stability. As I've already mentioned, we want to continue to innovate, leveraging the promise of artificial intelligence. One of our proposed recommendations would implement a generative AI program within CPSC's secure cloud environment. This setup ensures safe handling of sensitive queries and documents, compliance with policies and regulations, and improved internal efficiency. It also enhances access to technical knowledge and supports data-driven decision-making across the agency. Our financial management team has made vast strides by strengthening our financial reporting, which is evident with the clean audit opinion we earned in FY 2024. That said, more needs to be done to fully remediate prior year material weaknesses and continue to earn clean audit opinions. Other projects identified by staff as part of the mid-year process include migration of IT resources to the cloud for e-filing, updates to the Section 15 reporting portal for efficiency, a database of prioritized sensitizers, a tool for estimating carboxyhemoglobin levels from CO concentrations, AI and machine learning for chemical hazard identification, a study on children's products with risk assessments and market data, funding for web content managers for cpsc.gov, digital advertising for safety information, a campaign for baby safety awareness. All good and impactful projects for consideration, resources permitting. I would now like to provide a summary of the funding presented on slide 2. If we can pull up slide 2. The Commission voted on the FY 2025 operating plan on November 6, 2024, which consisted of 2 scenarios. One, a continuing resolution level of $151 million, and the President's budget level of $183 million. Given our current budgetary environment, the Commission voted to operate on the CR level. As we are aware, the federal government has had 2 CRs since the beginning of the fiscal year, with Congress ultimately enacting the full year CR for the remainder of FY 2025. Specifically, CPSC enacted appropriations under the full year CR is $151 million, which appropriately aligns with the operating plan. This enacted appropriation is inclusive of $4 million for the execution of 2 grant programs, which are for pool safely and carbon monoxide poisoning. With the enactment of the full CR, the program offices were provided with their full year allowances to continue executing their budgetary requirements in line with the operating plan. As shown on the slides, the program offices are in progress with their execution as of May 5th. They've obligated $21.4 million in non-salary dollars and have $16.3 million available to continue executing. As you'll hear in the next few slides, the available unexecuted balances will likely decrease between now and year end, dependent on the program office capabilities. I'd like to now turn it over to our Acting Chief Financial Officer, Casey Waith, who will present a summary of the staff's recommendations to the Commission. Before I do so, I want to thank our CPSC staff for their dedication to our public safety mission. I've served as CPSC's Executive Director for just over 2 months and could not possibly navigate this environment and the changes we are managing without their knowledge and professionalism. Casey?
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, Acting Chairman Feldman and Commissioners. Again, we appreciate the opportunity to provide a summary of the staff's recommendation that will be presented in the next few slides. So transitioning into slide number 3. Currently, we have estimated an unexecuted balance in FY25 to be approximately $3.5 million. This estimate includes a projected surplus of payroll dollars as well as non-payroll dollars from various contracts or interagency agreements that cannot be awarded due to either A, their acquisition feasibility, or B, those contracts and agreements that were awarded at a lower cost than was originally estimated. The staff's recommendation contains a prioritized list of 19 projects totaling a little more than $6.5 million to be funded, subject to the availability of unexecuted balances and their acquisition feasibility. Descriptions of these projects are available in the package submitted to the Commission in advance of this briefing. Transitioning into slide 4. As presented in the package, the projects were listed in priority order for your consideration. The list also included a cutoff line to highlight those projects that may be funded with this initial estimate that we've provided. Specifically, the first 7 projects total $3.2 million and are what the agency considers to be a high priority and most likely to be funded between now and September 30th. Transitioning into slide 5. This slide represents the remaining 12 projects, which total $3.3 million. While they are less likely to be funded by September 30th, simply because they exceed the current estimate of unexecuted balances. As has been the trend in past mid-year cycles, the unexecuted balance tends to increase as we draw near to the end of the fiscal year. While these 12 projects are not likely to be funded at this time, they may be funded at a later date, again, subject to the availability of those unexecuted balances. As those balances, unexecuted balances become available, we will ensure the Commission is informed of the projects that will be funded as they determine to be in priority order. In conclusion, I would like to acknowledge and thank our Acting Budget Officer, James Thompson, and his budget team, as well as managers and staff from the various program offices and operational support offices who assisted with preparing this year's mid-year package. And with that, I'd like to turn it back over to our Executive Director, Brian.
Thanks, Casey. This concludes our overview and summary of the staff recommendations presented to the Commission. This is my first mid-year, and I am excited to be here and answer Commission questions. Also with me today are leaders from various program offices that can provide additional insight on their projects if needed. In order to ensure accuracy, I may need to get back on specific questions in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lorenz, and thank you, Ms. Waith, for the briefing. We will now turn to questions from the Commission, and I'll start with myself. Mr. Lorenz, you mentioned in your remarks your belief that CPSC must deliver more effective and efficient and economical delivery of government service. I know you've been here only a couple months now, but you've had an opportunity to learn the agency and to get the lay of the land. Are there any obvious opportunities for additional efficiencies that you've been able to identify?
Yeah, I mean, my initial observations are that CPSC is a data-intensive environment. We use data to do our job. And I can't help but notice that we do have 5 different IT platforms that we work off of, right? So there is an opportunity for consolidation there. There also is an opportunity to use data. We use data in a for everything that we do. We use it to identify hazardous products. We use it to target shipments at the ports. It's core to what we do. By most of our mission systems are currently in an on-premise platform, and this limits how we can dynamically bring new data into our environment and innovate the way that we go about carrying out our mission. We're just limited by the fact that if we did identify data that we might wish to use, we'd literally have to issue a procurement, buy more servers, expand our footprint, get more space. That's not what we would need to do by expanding our cloud environment. And so I do think there's an enormous opportunity in moving strongly to the cloud and realizing some efficiencies in that process along the way.
I understand the economy argument for that sort of consolidation. Can you talk about how consolidating our data into a single environment would advance our mission? Are there pro-consumer safety benefits that we would realize through consolidation? Do you think we'd be able to identify hazards that we're currently missing if we did that type of consolidation?
I mean, it comes down to data, right? So we right now we gather. I won't say a limited amount of data, but it's definitely it's smaller than it might otherwise be, right? 77 hospitals injury data reports. We could potentially go and look to gather a broader population of health encounter data. But if we did, it would open up all kinds of opportunities. We could do analyses by states. We could do more granular analysis on different types of product related injuries. But right now, we would be limited bringing that new data into an on-premise environment because it cannot dynamically scale to whatever data that we can identify. And so we have to take advantage of the opportunity to do more granular analytics. We also have to have an environment that allows us to bring in more data.
I appreciate that answer. And at the risk of extending the line of questioning beyond what is appropriate for discussion in a public setting, do you have a view on what kind of cybersecurity risks exist when we've got 5 separate data environments that we need to maintain?
I would need to turn to our CIO to answer that question. At a high level, I would just simply say that we are protecting 2 systems, we're protecting 5 platforms, and we could go to protecting a smaller number of platforms. There's efficiency there, but we're happy to bring Brian.
We can get back in writing, but I appreciate that. Again, thank you for that answer, and thank you for all your work putting together today's presentation. Thank you both. Commissioner Honzarek.
And thanks to the staff for the work that they are doing generally, but specifically the work that for presenting the mid-year to us today. I know that's been a complex and difficult process. And when we met last year for mid-year, we were painfully aware about the future budget that we might be facing, as we had nearly exhausted the COVID era ARPA funds that we had received and then those were funds that we used to increase presence of the ports, improve our data systems, and that was running out at that time. The commission, the operating plan, approved a budget that assumed a flat appropriations and allocated resources for 534 staff. And to our benefit, when the appropriations were finally done, we did see that level to be approved by Congress and the president. And so, as you said, we are dealing with slightly over, or a little bit under $151 million as we're looking at this point in time to be able to go forward. That being said, I believe that in your presentation, you're estimating around $3 million in unallocated funding that would be able to use for as we go forward on projects. And I just want to dive into that a little bit deeper to really understand where that was coming from, to be able to make sure that I know how much we have in the projects we're looking forward. So right now, about how many FTE do we have currently on our payrolls?
It's 504.
504. And of those 504, about how many are on administrative leave, so that to know the numbers that we're actually sort of doing the day-to-day work?
I'm not sure, I don't want to cross any lines in discussing, the number of people that took DRP. I think that might be better suited to a closed meeting rather than a public hearing. I don't know if I would want to disclose that kind of information. Is that public information?
I think it's instrumental in trying to figure out how the agency is running and how to be able to make sure that we have enough people in place to be able to do the jobs that we're doing, obviously, to the extent that we are paying for people's salaries, but they're not in the office doing the work that needs to be done. That work has to be transferred to other people. Where those people are, what that impact is on the different departments is all relevant. So while I agree that as individual employees, I would never talk about in a public setting, trying to get a general sense of where we are. I think it's fair, but if there's a sense that that is not allowed, I'd like to get the position of.
I think that this is a discussion that's maybe best for closed session.
I would just ask the basis for being in closed session versus open session, that this seems to be, we're just talking about general numbers here. We're not talking anybody's individual positions on or who's in the building or not in terms of individuals.
I mean, I'm sharing, right, that you're right, that the FT level at the 150 million operating budget level was 534. And I'm sharing that we do have 504 active staff. There are staff members that have taken DRP and that are therefore they're on our rolls, but they're not active. But I'm just not clear how much we want to get into for the purpose of for prioritizing mid-year projects, how important it is to get into how many people took DRP. Is that necessary?
And partially it's as to whether we can get the work done that needs to get done, and where departments are in terms of being able to get additional support through the funding that we're looking at now or not getting support. It really goes into also hiring and those kinds of issues as well.
I mean, we are operating, you are correct that we are operating under our FTE ceiling by about a 10% margin right now.
We anticipate that there's going to be more people leaving before the end of the year as we're trying to figure out what our salary numbers are.
Yeah, I think that question in my mind really does involve non-public matters and that are pre-decisional in nature.
I actually think it's critical to know what we're estimating for the numbers towards the end of the year, because fundamentally the largest source of unallocated funds generally each year is how much the salaries are and how much we're going to pay out. And a lot of that gets analyzed so that if we are not going to be hitting those numbers, that's the money that we're going to be using to be able to go forward and pay for some of the contracts or other things that people are going out. So your estimate of 3 million, that is right. What percentage of that, or how much of that is the salaries that you don't anticipate that we're going to be using that were allocated in the operating plan?
So the non-labor related savings,
I was actually aiming for the labor-related savings.
sorry, labor related, the
labor.
labor related savings that realized savings is that we're estimating is 1.5. I mean, in identifying savings, we did take precautionary measures to preserve some of the savings for contingent liabilities the agency will incur as we address workforce size issues.
What would those contingent liabilities be?
They would be for separation related activities. It could be Vera VSEP, it could be DRP, it could be RIFs. Not that we're planning that, but it could be.
So I would say on that, noting that we are significantly under the 534 was what we thought we could maintain with a 151, slightly under 151. So the costs associated with that were incorporated into our budget at this point in time. We're running at, you said, I think 504 at this point in time. I really don't see a reason, given how we are severely understaffed at this point in time for that, for any reason that we would want to do a Vera VSIP or certainly not RIFs. To the extent that there's money being set aside in your analysis, I would say that that is not funding that should be set aside. It should be incorporated so we can analyze how much money that we can have to be able to know how many projects we need to fund at the end of the year or by the end of the year. So to the extent that you're setting money aside, I don't support, certainly not RIFs. I think the Vera VSIP is a bad idea in terms of encouraging other people to leave this agency, and that costs the agency money at the same time we're losing talent. So I think that is not a fair holdback going forward. So at that point in time, I think the full amount that would be salary saved, we should be looking to spend in this process, because I don't see a world in which I could support that going forward. And then the other half of that would be whether or not we are able to hire up, because obviously the more people we hire, the less money we'll have. And I know there's a number of critical hires that are out there right now. I mean, this way we've worked together. I know that you're doing a great job, but you're also in the position of acting CFO. I think that we don't have a permanent chief budget officer. We don't have a permanent CFO. We don't have a head of compliance. Are those positions, do we have job announcements out for those? Are we going to be able to fill those quickly?
We don't have job announcement out for those, and we are abiding by the current federal hiring freeze.
So that we've been told that we can't hire at this point in time. So we're understaffed, have money to hire people, but we're not hiring people. So I think, again, going down the path of RIFs or Vera VSIPs, I think is a terrible idea. And so I would say that money we should reallocate towards funding. I'll have more questions. I'll move on.
Thank you. I would remind commissioners that the Sunshine in Government Act requires all of us to confine our remarks to the scope of the meeting notice, and that remarks should be limited to consideration of the prioritization of projects to be funded by potential unexecuted balances in FY25. We can go into executive session to discuss the amending the scope of the meeting if necessary to discuss other matters. But let's try to keep the discussion today focused on what's been publicly noticed. Commissioner Trumka.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When CPSC is firing on all cylinders, we can absolutely do amazing things. And we only have to look to last year and what we're doing now to find that out. Last year, we adopted final rules to protect babies from suffocating in nursing pillows, loungers, and baby pillows. And those just went into effect. Lives will be saved because of that work. We approved important rules to be finalized this year to keep kids safer from things like water beads, button batteries, and toys and infant neck floats. Our compliance team has assessed tens of millions of dollars in civil penalties using our razor-thin budget to return money to American taxpayers. Last year, our import team conducted over 51,000 product screenings at traditional ports of entry into our country, plus another 14,000 screenings of de minimis shipments. Our port staff is where the rubber meets the road, enforcing safety standards and directly intercepting goods from overseas. Last year, our communications team got more than 19 million engagements with innovative posts that boost the reach of our safety message. Our consumer ombudsman alone helped 500 consumers understand CPSC's research and safety standards, directly protecting those families. If we don't reach consumers with safety information, our work to protect American families cannot succeed. There's no shortage of problems that need fixing to keep the American people safe. Indeed, the Commission made a promise to the public that we would fix many of them. We laid out those promises in the 2025 operating plan, which all 5 of us passed unanimously and in a nonpartisan fashion. That operating plan is still the operative document that guides the work of this agency. In that plan, the Commission directed staff to provide a final rule briefing package on infant rockers this fiscal year, meaning by the end of September. Those are products designed like the Fisher-Price Rock and Play that was tied to over 100 infant deaths. Will we receive that final rule this year?
I don't know if you will receive it this year.
Mr. Boniface, can you help us answer that question? Or can you provide more clarity as to what you mean?
Well, I just don't know whether it will be ready for the commission to consider this year. I'm glad we did receive a number of questions from your office Friday, and we are going through all of those. We want to make sure that we give you accurate, complete, reliable answers. We are working. And we will. But it will take us some time to make sure that the conditions and the assumptions that around some of these estimates of what we will be able to do before the end of the fiscal year, we want to give you a quality answer. And I don't have a certain answer to give you
I
at
don't
this
need a
point
certain
in time.
answer. Do you expect, I mean, you know the state of things on these, and I'm going to ask you about a few of these rulemaking packages. Do you expect us to have that by the end of this fiscal year?
I just don't know. I really don't have an answer for you, and I don't want to give you a false expectation that you will or will not.
I appreciate that, but if you know that it's not going to happen, it's okay to say that you don't think it's going to happen.
I don't know that it's not going to happen.
We directed a final rule to come to the Commission this year on aerosol dusters to combat over 100 deaths per year. Will we receive that final rule this year?
That's going to be pretty much exactly the same answer. Until I've had an opportunity to sit down with staff, go through every potential rulemaking, where we are in the process, the conditions and the assumptions that are being made.
We've got staff in this room with more direct knowledge of that process. Could we have Mr. Boniface help us with these questions?
Yeah, if he's able to answer with certainty, he's welcome to.
I'm not asking for certainty, but I'm asking for our best estimation right now. Mr. Boniface, can you join us?
Sure.
And so I'll pose that question on the Rockers rule. What is your assessment as to whether we will be able to get a final rule this fiscal year?
So the Rockers final rule I would characterize as at risk. I think we briefed that as we are working and particularly working in collaboration with ASTM on the firmness and concavity for which we've gotten significant comments in the NPR.
Thank you. And when you say at risk, you mean at risk of not delivering that final rule this year?
Yes. And so I will make the characterization that any rule that we don't complete in this fiscal year, we will absolutely work our level best to minimize the essence.
I know you will. Aerosol dusters?
So that one staff is working on. I do anticipate absent sort of last minute changes that we'll have that this year.
That's great to hear. We directed 2 final rules to come to the commission this year on carbon monoxide poisoning that together could save over 100 infant lives per year from portable generators and furnaces and boilers. Will we receive those 2 final rules this year?
So as we have briefed in separate commissioner meetings, those 2 are at significant risk. We've got the notices of availability that we have to get out, and then there'll be a subsequent comment period following that.
We directed a final rule to come to commission this year on those gruesome impalement deaths in side-by-sides from debris penetration. Will we receive that final rule this year?
So we are working to bring that this fiscal year.
We directed a final rule to come to the commission this year to address the frequent amputations and bone fractures from table saws. Will we receive that final rule this year?
So that one I would characterize, again, as we've discussed in previous meetings, as at significant risk. We've got the data to get published in the notice of availability.
We directed a final rule this year to address child strangulation from custom corded window coverings, a problem that the public has been waiting decades for us to protect them from. Will we receive that final rule this year?
We are working on that. At this stage, I'm not sure we're going to be able to complete that, but we are working on that.
Okay. I do appreciate the added clarity, and thank you for joining us and providing that, and thank you for allowing that. But, you know, it sounds like you flagged a number of rules at significant risk for us not being able to complete. And those are commitments we made to the American public to protect them from very serious risks of gruesome injury and deaths. So it's of great concern. Mr. Boniface, the agency staffing shortages that we've talked a little bit about this morning, are they a contributing factor in our inability to finalize these rules?
I mean, clearly, if we're operating at 10% reduced staff, it has an impact on our ability to get work done.
Thank you. You know, and I'll follow up on what Commissioner Hohen-Sarek was asking about here. We know that when we made these commitments to the public in the operating plan, we did plan for that staffing level of 534. And so we believed that we could have delivered all of these results to the American public and kept them safer if we had those 534 people, but we're currently operating at much lower levels, which you've identified this morning. You said we're down 10% if you take into account the fork in the road folks, and the back of the envelope math for me is around 480, which based on that 10% number you said. And that's about 100 people fewer than recent levels. It also puts us below the statutory floor in our law that requires a minimum of 500 full-time employees. Congress made that call about our staffing floor. I'm concerned that we're not heeding that call, but I'm also concerned, as I've raised, about how the safety mission could be taking the hit because of it. And because of pressures outside this agency, you know, based on your math, let's say we're paying 25 or so people to not work. I can't imagine a more counterproductive use of taxpayer funds. But even with those budgeted slots claimed by the fork, we still have over 509 slots, around 509 slots funded. But we're operating significantly, tens of people, maybe 30 people down from that. And one thing that does make clear is that no reductions in force are financially necessary. We've got the money to keep everyone here today employed all year. So RIFs would just be another example of wasting the money Congress gave us to pay out separation costs instead of paying staff to do the work Congress directed us to. I don't think the American people can afford to lose anybody else keeping them safe at this agency. I'm running short on time, so I will reserve the rest for another round. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Boyle.
Thank you. I'm actually very happy to be here today because this is a ritual we do every year. We take, and excuse me, I know it's new to you. And Ms. Way, thank you so much for stepping in. And it's really new to you too. But it is something, it's an opportunity for us to take a moment and step back and evaluate where we are at the agency in terms of what our staffing is, what the work we're doing, what the work we haven't accomplished. And it's an important opportunity for the management of this agency to really take a moment and assess what it is that we're accomplishing. And it's also important for us to do this in public so that the American people can know what we're spending our dollars on, what we're not spending our dollars on, and have that discussion in the public. So I do always look forward to this meeting because it's an opportunity to recalibrate if we need to, or in this case, I was actually celebrating. So in March, when we got the full appropriation, I was delighted. I thought, great, we're going to be able to do everything that was in the operating plan that this commission voted for. We're going to be able to have full employment. And I think, Mr. Lorenz, I'm hearing something different from you today. So was it good news that we got the 534 FTE approval and a full appropriation, or is it not good news?
It is good news that we got the 151 billion appropriations.
Okay, so then I'm going to go back and talk about some of the things that Commissioner Hohenstark talked about and my colleague talked about, because then I'm puzzled because I thought it was good news too. But I feel like we are talking about not living up to that FTE level, which is something that is disturbing to me. So I want to ask, has anyone been hired since, I guess you said before you're honoring the freeze, and that's why we're not trying to meet the 534 level. Is that right?
Yeah, there have been hires in the office of the acting chairman, which are exempt from the hiring freeze. But other than that, there has not been any hiring.
So how many total have been hired since January?
I don't.
Think you might be included.
Exactly. Yeah, I should probably include myself. I'd like to provide that in writing. It's not a large number, but let's be precise, and I'll provide it to you in writing for the record.
But nobody else has been hired?
No.
Okay. Have you done an assessment of what would be a critical hire in the event that there would be an opportunity to at least assess, which is what I'm talking about here? That's what we do at Midyear. We're assessing our needs. Have you done an analysis of what we have typically called critical hires that we would really absolutely need to fill?
We have identified some positions that we are that we would like to hire because we think they are, in your words, critical, and we have asked.
Are they, in your words, critical?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if we characterize them as critical. They're important enough that we've asked for exemptions to the hiring freeze from OPM. So. And
what was the response to that?
So far, they have given us a very, very recent heads up. I think it was on Friday afternoon that we can hire, that we have one exemption.
Or
it would be for the Port of Houston inspector.
Okay. Can you identify the other critical hires that, other than the Port of Houston, you would think?
I'm sure I can, and I can, but I don't have it in front of me. I think there's 8 total positions, and I'd be glad to provide that in writing for the record. I have a little bit of a list, and maybe you can
answer whether you think they're critical or not. Do you think that the head of compliance is a critical position?
Yes, so it's one of the positions on the list.
Chief Financial Officer?
Yep. Yes.
Head of HR?
Yes.
How about the Deputy in Risk Reduction?
Yes.
Are there others? Can you identify them?
I would much rather provide this in writing so I don't get it wrong.
Okay, I just would say, I would think that as the executive,
you will receive it. I promise you will receive the list. I just don't want to give you the wrong list, and I didn't bring the list with me.
No, I understand that, but we're talking about a mid-year evaluation and the needs of the agency. So I would think that it would be something you would know, that what the list of critical hires, since you're saying it's somewhere in the vicinity of 8. So it's part of how I do see the mid-year process as a holistic evaluation of.
If you have the list, I'm happy to share the list of that list of employees that we're seeking an exemption from.
Good morning. These are not in particular order, but I'll list the titles if that's okay.
And who identified this list?
So with the program offices, we put the list together and passed it to the executive director and the acting chairman's office for a review.
Okay, thank you.
So by title, the Chief Financial Officer, the Budget Officer, the Director of Compliance, Associate Executive Director of Compliance Activities, Chief Data Officer, the Deputy for Risk Reduction, the Port of Houston Inspector, Internal Controls Auditor, and Deputy General Counsel, Office of General Counsel.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Okay, and Ms. Lorenz, I want to go back to the discussion on unexecuted balances, if I might. Again, I'm trying to understand why the amount that you identified of 3.5 million is what it is, where you got that number. It seems in years past, the last 2 years, in last fiscal year, it was 2.9 million at mid-year. The year before that, I think it was about 3.5. That's typically a number that we see at mid-year, but I would argue, and I think you would agree, that this is not a typical year. And so I would have expected to see the number be significantly higher than that, because we're about 70% salary based. And if we're 10% below, even accounting for the staff that are on administrative leave, there's a huge deficit in salary, which in my view would yield a much higher amount for the unexecuted balances. And I'm just trying to understand why this year is essentially coming out the same as every other year, when this year is very different.
Casey, do you want to walk through the process that we went through to get to 3.5?
So we did an analysis of both, to your point, Commissioners, salary and non-salary dollars. We have to make sure that we have reservation.
Ms. Waite, can I
Yes.
just interrupt? I would just like to focus on the salary dollars, not the non-salary dollars, just for a moment, if you would.
Yes.
Thank you.
So in being good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars, we always have to account for any contingent liabilities. And so that is factored into our analysis.
Okay, and what would those contingent liabilities be? Because that has not occurred in my experience here, working with mid-year and operating plans. We have not done that. What are you talking about specifically?
So we have different categories. So we have to, in any analysis in any year, we have to account for those dollars that may have to be paid out for annual leave salaries, if you will. So we do have to account for that. And if staff, choose not to depart, that is okay. We still have to account for it because it's a requirement the agency would have to fund if they departed.
I'm not sure I followed that, but is it fair to say one of the contingent liabilities that you took into account were potential additional rifts or separations through VIRA, VSIP or something like that? Is that what you're talking about?
I do think that it's important that we not cross some lines. My understanding is that when we start getting into things like RIFs, that we're beyond the scope of the notice under the Government Sunshine Act. And I'm concerned that we're going into territory where we're happy to have this conversation in non-public forum. It's just that discussing this in public to us, we're getting into non-public matters that are pre-decisional in nature. And that's what we're concerned about. Non-public matters, pre-decisional in nature.
I could not disagree more that the public should hear what we are spending our money on and what we're planning. And so I absolutely disagree with that. But this is a theoretical question that I'm asking Ms. Waite at this moment. It is a contingent liability. It's not saying that you're doing it. Is that something you would consider, you did consider in arriving at the number? And was it additional layoffs, rifts, or separations from the agency?
But what I'm worried about in the question is that to answer the question, Casey needs to somehow talk about something that is pre-decisional in nature in a public forum.
It's a yes or no question.
Please repeat the question.
Did you consider as a contingent liability rifts, layoffs, VIRA, VSIP, or other separation liabilities, which would account for the low number of unexecuted balances?
She did.
That was the question.
All right. But I feel like we're slowly veering into pre-decisional, non-public matter that we could easily address in our weekly commissioner meetings with you. It's not that we're holding it back. It's just that it's the issue of talking about pre-decisional, non-public information in a public hearing. And that's what really.
Time's up, but we can continue on the next.
And
round.
I'm sure I'm trying to be responsible in the way that we answer these questions in such a public forum when some of this is, as I say, pre-decisional, and it's not meant for public consumption at this point in time. It
Thank
will
you very
be.
much, Commissioner. Commissioner Ziak.
Thank you, Acting Chairman Feldman. Thank you for your leadership as we navigate new opportunities and improvements to this agency. Thank you to staff joining us today. Appreciate you've all been put on the spot. Appreciate all the work and the thoughtful policy suggestions you've provided the Commission's consideration in this mid-year review. Changed in the new year since we approved the operating plan. President Trump and our new Congress and the priorities they are establishing provide us with a clearer picture not only of the agency's appropriations for the rest of this fiscal year, but also for future funding, with an expectation to direct our spending towards programs that further the agency's core mission of protecting Americans against the unreasonable risk associated with consumer products. I appreciate the renewed focus on spending that strengthens the work at our labs and technology upgrades that aim to assist key program offices in identifying and remedying product safety violations more effectively and more efficiently. Not a new way of thinking for me. My colleagues up here on the dais may recall, during my testimony last July at the budget hearing in front of the House Energy and Commerce Subcommittee, I argued we should plan conservatively, prioritize our work carefully, and find ways to work harder and smarter and do more with less. That includes particularly needed improvements in technology where we lag and can find efficiencies. I think, based on the briefings I've received, very quickly. Further testified that working in the Senate taught me government efforts cannot, though often are, siloed. I suggested we look for ways to leverage relationships both with the private sector and among other government agencies, including partners like U.S. Customs and Border Protection. This will provide a bigger bang for our collective buck. Toward that end, I appreciate the focus of these projects presented today and look forward to continuing the discussion how they will improve the effectiveness and the efficiency in achieving the core mission. I'd also note that, given some of my colleagues' questions, there is a $3 million, $3.3 million additional projects recommended, which we can work with should excess dollars become available. And so I appreciate the work in that in terms of what we were trying to identify. And I want to continue to focus on the projects that the staff has identified, not the hypotheticals that may or may not occur or that may be pre-decisional. Again, thank you for your time, and I don't have any further questions. You've answered most of my questions in the pre-briefings.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you very much. There has been a request for a second round of questions, and I will turn things over to Commissioner Honzarek.
Thank you.
You're recognized for 10 minutes.
Thanks. I would say, just to start with, I know that you were worried about pre-decisional, but honestly, everything that we're doing today is pre-decisional. There are no decisions that have been made on the mid-year. This entire process is actually a pre-decisional process that is called and done in public, consistent with our regs and what the process should be. Because I agree that as we're looking at use of taxpayer funds, it needs to be done in a transparent way that people can understand. Putting that aside, I do understand. I want to go back to, I know the Office of Financial Management has been hit hard by the freeze and going forward and trying to understand what they need going forward. So the mid-year package is largely contracts coming up. And while each department is going to do its own contracts, they're all going to go through finance in the end of the day. So does the Office of Financial Management need additional resources, people to be able to handle that influx of contracts? And is there a plan put forth as to how to make sure those contracts don't all land on Ms. Wade's desk at, I don't know, September 15th?
In financial management, we always are looking for ways to be more efficient with the taxpayers' dollars. So that's what I can say to that is we look for those efficiencies to make sure we still execute the mission that is intended of CPSC.
And I believe that you do that and you're running with multiple hats on right now, showing that even when you're overwhelmed, you're trying to get the job done. But my question really is, this is mid-year as we're trying to look to see how to allocate resources and make sure that we are managing the commission in a smart way, knowing that we're going to have these contracts coming forward and the money that's been put in here. Whether additional funds, people, others would be needed to be able to avoid, honestly, a crisis at the end of the year where there are $6 million in contracts coming facing you down. We're either being pushed through to be able to make the deadline and therefore potentially engaging in, I don't want to have FARS violations. I don't want to have any problems where it's getting done in a sloppy way. At the same time, I don't want to actually be in a position where finance is unable to process millions of dollars in contracts. So that money, which has been laid out, there are good projects that are for the safety of American people, just don't get done. And then the funds are returned to Treasury because we couldn't do it in a timely manner. So what I'm really trying to do is, and I'm trying to figure out how to be helpful in making sure that the resources are there to be able to do that. And then from a management perspective, I think I'll be looking to you, Mr. Lorenz. What's the process you have in place to make sure that it's all not dropping on Ms. Wade's desk at the last minute?
Yeah, so I think it's a good question. It's one that we will look into. I am not aware at this time that our procurement shop is particularly affected, but we will consult. And if there is a gap on the consulting procurement side that puts our ability to get contracts or task orders out the door as we bump up against the end of the fiscal year, we'll advise you of what we discover, and we'll discuss how we can mitigate that risk to the extent there is a risk, which I'm not aware there is a risk right now today.
And I think that's half. I appreciate that. And that's sort of half of the problem. The other half is making sure that there's a process in place so that honestly, finance isn't jammed at the end of the year. So it's making sure that the calls have gone out, that the different departments have identified what they can and can't get done before the end of the year. And that management is honestly at times writing them to make sure that they are turning back money in a timely manner so that that can be reallocated. And I would say I want to make sure that process is put in place.
We'll follow up on this one. This is this is something I would want to understand if we have a risk. I'm not aware that we have a risk in this area right now, but we will discuss, close door, and get back to you.
I would note that in a regular year, we always have a risk because we always have things happening at the end of the year, and finance is always put under stress at that point in time. And this is not necessarily a regular year, and they are understaffed at this point in time. So I'm glad that you'll follow up at that. And to the extent that looking at, you do have a project number 7 in the list that talks about funding for a contractor for finance, and I think it's at $134,000. And I know that I believe this is the one that has helped in the past, and I think it's been critical in making sure we got to the clean audit, as you talked about, that we had last year. Is that a sufficient amount of money for that contract? Is there flexibility that needs to be given in that? I'm just trying to figure out if there's additional funds that are needed.
It is the amount requested by Casey's office, and so I want you to answer whether you put the right amount in there.
Yes, based on the information we have, that is what we've looked at as a sufficient amount to continue on in our audit efforts and to also contribute to the remediation. So we've had the several material weaknesses, which we have successfully remediated to date. We just have a little bit more work to do and feel that this additional support is going to be invaluable to lead us down that path.
Okay. I mean, I know that we came in 2 tranches last year because there were unanticipated needs coming from the contractor. And obviously I want to be supportive, but figure out what the best estimate for the actual number is at this point in time. And if that's what you're saying, that's fine. I mean, I think staying within finance, trying to, actually, it's not finance, crosses over a couple, but finance is a major part of it. Part of the appropriations that we received is about $4 million in grant money that funds 2 different programs. There is the Virginia Graham Baker Pool and Spa Safety grant program, and then the Nicholas and Zachary Burt carbon monoxide safety grant program. So we have, I believe, some money in the fund still, and then it was upped for another $4 million in total between the 2 of them through our appropriations. Do we have staff who are focused on this at this point in time?
This is we do not have a part-time grants manager right now. So right now that is a risk. We are having discussions whether our procurement staff can handle those 2 grants as opposed to bringing on board a grants person at this point in time.
Would they be hiring a grants person or contracting out the grants work?
That would be hiring. Let me turn this over to Casey, but I believe that's to hire a grants manager.
We did earlier in the year seek to hire, before the hiring freeze came about, to hire a grants management specialist, but we were not able to do that as there were just the applicants opted not to accept the offer. But we are exploring opportunities or other areas to see how we can best execute and award the grants money that's been appropriated to us.
Currently, we're under a freeze. Do you know what that freeze is until?
It lasts through July.
July. And that would leave us, the hiring process usually takes several weeks. So if the freeze is out there, we're going through this July, August. We're going to reach my analysis off the top of my head is if we're looking to hire somebody, we're not going to have them in place before the end of the year. And we're not going to have, so it's planned not to have grants out this year with the money that, or at least a funding opportunity announcement before the end of the year?
That is not the plan. Our plan is to determine whether we can get it out before the end of the year using contracting officers as opposed to a grants manager. That is what we're working on right now.
Okay. And do we need additional funds? Do we need to be able to go and look at alternatives we have in past years, number of past years, contracted out our work on grants? Is that being considered, and what would the additional funds be necessary to do that?
So we are exploring if we're able to do those interagency agreements that we've had in the past to award our grants. So it is something we'll have to get back to the commission on to see how that plan unfolds. But we are trying to be efficient and use our internal resources to continue the grants program.
My time is up. I would say the grants are extremely important. Congress has given us a task to do. We need to figure out how to do it.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Commissioner Trumka, you're recognized for 10 additional minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as we talked about staffing shortages a little bit, one thing that came out is that we have those have hit our port inspectors too, and that compromises our ability to stop dangerous foreign goods at the ports. I'll ask a limited question here because I know the sensitivity of our spread there. So without talking about any specific ports, please. How many ports used to have at least one full-time inspector and now have no coverage of that port or only part-time coverage?
Let me see if Jim, you want to come on up and answer that question.
And Jim, let me know if you need me to repeat that because.
Thank you. I think you were asking
How many, are there any
I will repeat it just to make sure
Please.
we're on the same page. And without mentioning any specific ports, how many ports used to have at least one full-time inspector and now have no coverage at that port or only part-time coverage?
So we lost 2 ports last year where we had employees leave, which were or transition to another job that were single staff ports.
Okay. I think we agree on this.
Could
We
I-
need to close those gaps. And yeah,
Yeah,
please
yeah,
add anything else you need.
So it's actually 3. We've talked about one of those ports that we did get authorization to backfill. So after we fill that position, there will be 2.
Okay. But we're talking about 3 right now.
Right.
Which is a critical gap I think we need to work on. Thank you, Jim. That was the only question I had on that. Question for compliance. One of the priority activities set in the operating plan, and it was identified as EXC-M02, is to screen children's products for violations at 75 establishments in underserved communities. How many have we conducted, and will we meet that goal?
Good morning.
Good morning.
I think the latest number that I have on that is 97 visits for this year. So I think we're going to exceed that goal.
Okay, great. Now, I do want to take a second to focus on something that's working well, something positive, and highlight one of our most valuable employees, and that's our consumer ombudsman. His job per the operating plan is to, quote, perform preventative consumer outreach and education to prevent deaths, injuries, and incidents associated with all of the hazard patterns and products in the commission's jurisdiction. And I have heard personally from grieving consumers how much of a godsend he's been to them as he approaches impossibly difficult situations with compassion, empathy, and infinite patience. And so my thank you to him. And as we consider mid-year funding options, I want to make sure we're giving him everything he needs to keep up those excellent levels of service, and that he has all the resources he needs to hit all of his office's critical functions and performance measures that are directed by the operating plan. Now, the mid-year plan that you submitted to and you briefed us on this morning with the projects, it provides that list of projects that will be funded as money becomes available, as you've described. And I understand, what I want to understand is the point at which we turn to that list. And so before we move to anything on that list, we will obligate funds towards all of the projects contemplated in the operating plan as drafted. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Are there any projects contemplated by the operating plan that staff is not planning on conducting?
I think we have to, that goes to some of the questions that you asked in writing on Friday. And we are going through that list and making sure that our assumptions that we use to answer that questions are correct, conditions. And so we're going to answer that question. It's a delicate question, so we want to make sure that we answer it correctly, and we will. But I can't answer it at this point in time.
I'm going to let you slide with a non-answer today, but I do need a quick answer once you've had time to get back to it and circulate that to all the commissioners, because that is like the bread and butter of what feeds our decision making at this point. So we need it before we can move on to a decisional vote here.
Thank you.
But I appreciate that. The operating plan directed a study on infant sleep deaths, and that's on page OS 49 pursuant to Trump Amendment 2, which I thank my colleagues for their support for. And we deferred to staff to select the most useful study in that space. So do we have an answer on which products related to infant sleep deaths that staff chose to study? And can we get an update on where that project stands in the process? Hello again.
Hello. Yeah, so it's not really two products, but the first product is bassinets that we focused on, and again that research is helping us with our bassinet rulemaking. The second is more dealing with the class of products, and it's looking at the concavity and firmness issues, particularly with seeded products. So those are the two areas that we are
And where are they at in the process? Are they underway?
Yeah, so both, we have research efforts underway on both of those. They've been underway through the full fiscal year.
Likewise, the commission authorized a study on ATV stability and handling under project 22637 last year. What's the status of that study?
So the last funded study was an FY23 funded study on ATV stability that was completed in FY 2024, and that report has been posted.
I'm talking about the study that we authorized to be undertaken this year under 22637 on the testing procedure for stability.
So no funds were allocated for that particular.
Okay, no funds yet, but so because that's an item contemplated by the operating plan, I do want to confirm that goes to the same answer you're talking about. Things like that get funded, and that specifically gets funded before we move on to the items in the mid-year list. Is that correct? Or your microphone's not on.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Now, turning to the items proposed for funding in the mid-year package before us, I wanted to ask about our NICE hospital system, which is very clearly the gold standard for making national injury projections for consumer products. But it's made some unwelcome headlines recently, and that's definitely through no fault of our own, but because of CDC stopping funding its portion of the cost, which is compromising our ability to continue the program at full strength. Before us is a proposal to make up that lost CDC funding from our small budget, but it does allow us, as proposed, to keep all of the hospitals in that system and allows us to keep making great national injury estimates. But the question about the proposal that I have for you is, as drafted, it seems to combine two different things in one bucket there. One, the maintaining all of the NICE hospitals, and two, seeking data from other sources. How much of the $2 million that you've put for those combined projects is needed for just keeping the NICE hospitals in our program?
So if we stayed with exactly 77 hospitals, that's what we have today, it would be the total cost, the lost cost from CDC is 1.8 million.
Okay.
The issue, I think, for consideration is, and this is why we worded the recommendation the way we worded it. Historically, NICE hospitals have gone from 100 hospitals collected to 62, I believe, has been the low. The low has been 62, the high has been 100. And so every time that we drop, we lose, we increase our statistical variance. So essentially what we're buying for the $1.8 million is statistical variance, confidence level. And so the question before the commission, in our view, is that you have a choice. You could go from 77 to 62 hospitals. That would still be in line with historical patterns. You could go somewhere between 77 and 62.
Yeah.
And depending on where you decide to make the investment, that leaves us more money to look at options for the longer term, where we could potentially purchase medical encounter records and look for other ways to complement the NICE hospital work. Does that make sense?
It does. And I appreciate how you described it as an option, because I think we need to consider that. And given how critical I personally think keeping all of those NICE hospitals is, I recommend we break this into two projects and give us that choice. One, fully funding NICE, which I believe personally is needed, and to maintain that entire footprint. And then two, a separate pilot program to scope out other injury data sources and report back to the commission with options on how to proceed. I see that I am out of time, and I will keep the rest in the second round. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Boyle, you're recognized for an additional 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lorenz, Ms. Ways. I want to go back to the discussion we were having, but move on a little bit from staffing to the projected spending in the program area offices. We got full funding only in March, and so that transfer occurred after then, presumably. And in my experience, a good management tool is, evaluating what we've spent and making projections for each office to figure out, what we need to spend and what we reasonably can expect to spend. So I wanted to ask, I know you provided our offices with actual spending for each of the program offices, but I don't think we received projected spending for the offices. Have you done that kind of analysis, Mr. Lorenz?
So we have allocated the full CR dollars to the program offices at this point in time. They were operating, at a run rate. Once they got their full CR, they made plans accordingly to expend funds in support of their mission as it was defined in the operating plan. So the kinds of money that we're talking about using today don't relate to the money that all of the money has been allocated in a line with the operating plan.
I understand that. I'm just trying to understand whether you did an analysis of what actually will be a projection of what will be spent, given it's this point in the fiscal year, the likelihood of, and it never gets spent the full amount. And so in terms for a management tool and for also a tool for purposes of mid-year to at least project or estimate what the unexecuted balances would be available to the commission to spend, whether you did that, whether the program offices were asked to do that type of analysis. So I could use your office as an example.
We have asked questions of those offices. So, for example, the Office of Risk Reduction, we're having a conversation about where there might be some unobligated balances, and we've identified a small number. But and the same thing at a lesser level within IT. But we have not done an analysis at scale across all offices at this point. We do normally launch that. I believe we launched that in July, correct?
Yes, that's correct. We do. When we look at the, as part of our process and we draw near to the end of the fiscal year, we do start to ask the program offices to give us the information. What do you potentially forecast to be your unexecuted balance? And what we would do is call those sweeps,
Okay.
which usually
So,
happens.
sorry to interrupt. So then how do you come up with a projected amount of unexecuted balances for the program offices for the purposes of this exercise if you haven't done that?
It's historical pattern. It's
Yes,
Casey does it. This is my first cycle in this process, but Casey does this, and it's completely historical pattern driven.
Correct. So part of our estimate was based on the historically what the program offices have returned so that we could use that towards mid-year purposes. That is correct.
Okay. I guess I would say this is a year unlike any other. So perhaps a different analysis may have been warranted, but I take your answer. Thank you. I said I was moving on from staffing, but I actually want to go back to staffing because, again, our biggest resource is staffing. Our biggest dollar amount is spent on staffing, and it's our treasure here. So I do want to go back and talk a little bit about, you didn't give a specific answer to Commissioner Hohensarik on the number of employees who took the fork, but you gave 10%. And if you do the math, it's somewhere, it sounds like north of a couple dozen in that area based on the answer that you gave to Commissioner Hohensarik. And I wanted to ask you, and I know I've asked in the past in our meetings, other commissioners have asked whether you've done a gap analysis to understand the impact of the staffing shortages as a result of employees who took the fork. And I wanted to know, you have said to me that you were a gap analysis was not completed, but that you were going to provide in the mid-year process an update to the commission on the impact. And I note that the package did not include that kind of analysis. So I wanted to ask you, have you done a gap analysis? If not, why not? And, you did indicate that you're going to provide one.
We are doing a gap analysis. we do have feedback from all of the program offices. When we are reviewing it, I would say that some of the conditions and assumptions that some of the gaps are based on need to be validated. And we haven't had the time to validate all of those assumptions and conditions. As soon as we have a chance to sit down with each program office, validate what they're telling us in terms of impact, whether it's a people impact or a funding impact or a travel impact, whatever the impact might be, we will get that and we will share that with you.
Okay, if I asked this easily 6 weeks ago, and you said that you provided at mid-year. We're now at mid-year, and so I wonder when you're going to be able, because this is the time when we need to be doing that evaluation, because we're taking a look at that's what we're here for right now, is assessing where we are. And so it would be helpful to the commission, at least to me, to have that kind of analysis as we look at the projects that you have presented to us, and not knowing what the impact on the metrics, the operating plan metrics that I presume not all the operating plan metrics are going to be met if we're operating at such a deficit of staff. So just having that information would be helpful. And, as I say, I understood it to be coming in the mid-year package.
It is.
Go ahead.
That wasn't really a question, was it?
I think you answered it as best you could. Okay. And I also wanted to ask about, you also in the communication to me where you indicated that you were going to provide information on the FORK program at mid-year. You also said you were going to provide information about reassignments that have been made. And so I would ask about those as well. I guess we'll start with international. Can you tell me what happened with the reassignments there and how many, I'll start there.
So we started this fiscal year, actually the beginning of the year, with 5 FTE in the office. Recent retirement, Rich O'Brien, the previous director. We also had another employee, a voluntary, went to another agency. We had another employee that opted in on the deferred resignation program. And that left 3 employees that remained. 2 of the employees were reassigned to EXRR.
Can you tell me why?
Sure, to cover gaps in some of the vacancies that we had in that program area. And we had 1 employee that was reassigned to compliance to cover a gap there.
So who are any functions of the international office being performed?
Yes, I met yesterday with a delegation from the Israeli government at our testing evaluation center. It's primarily that government-to-government interaction that we continue to keep going.
Do you have other jobs, Mr. Ray, that you might also be doing?
I do.
Can you tell me what they are?
Yes, I also the compliance import team and EXRR team all report to me, and we work together and trying to fill and wear lots of hats. So
is your time being used elsewhere too in response to other external requests? How much of your time is being used for that?
I couldn't give an accounting on my time. No, I've worn lots of hats around here, as you know, over the years, and I try to help where I can, and that's my goal.
Okay, well, I would argue that you are overextended and there might be a staffing issue there. Okay, and in turn, I think those are all I had for international. Thank you. And I guess I would ask Ms. Springs to come up because I wanted to ask about SBO. Although I have, you know what, we can wait till next round because I'm realizing I'm over my time. So Ms. Springs can get ready for that next round. But thank you very much, Ms. Lawrence.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Commissioner Ziak.
Yes, thank you. I had not planned on asking follow-up rounds, but given the discussion, I do have a few questions. Ms. Waith, questions about Commission's ability to spend these funds should the mid-year be approved. I am assuming that given the work that's already gone into this, there is no intent to wait until September. Of course, there are always delays that occur, contingencies have to be accounted for, but the plan would be to start these spends once the approval is granted. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Can you factor that into the financial team's ability workload?
Factor is in.
In terms of time and necessary resources so that you're not, your team isn't trying to push these out on September 15th to try to get these contracts out, assuming that others in the organization do their work in a timely manner?
Yes, we are being efficient in the process. And if the commission votes to fund these projects, we are being efficient and we will make sure that's executed.
Thank you. And one last question, just to make clear. In the past, again, given the nature of government obligations and spending, things do come up at the end, and there often is a bit of a scramble at the end of a fiscal year to reallocate funds. Is that correct? That's not necessarily unusual about any given year.
No, that is correct. That's usually the normal sequence of events that happens in any fiscal year.
Thank you. Mr. Lorenz, a lot of discussion about staff, and staff is a significant priority, but we're also, since my arrival here, I've heard it said we are a data-driven agency. Some instances I found that to be the case. In others, I think it's more aspirational. What I see in this list are a number of technology upgrades that would move us towards actually being more data-driven. Is that the intent of the list here? And can you talk a little bit about some of these projects and how they would achieve that, including our use of AI that will create the efficiencies, I think, in the personnel workload?
Yes, I mean, you correctly characterized the list and the priorities, although there are others on our list that are also technology in nature. We are, as you said, we're a data intensive organization. We use data to make decisions. We do think that there are opportunities to use data more strategically and to use more data. But we have to get our information technology environment consolidated around the cloud. We need to move from expensive proprietary software to open source. We need to look at other new data sets that we might be able to bring in, and we need to harness the power of generative AI. And so there are, as you've seen, there is a particular project on the list that would actually enable our environment to do generative AI. And to create that and do it in a way in which, as you know, we want to use generative AI on our internal data, but we don't want our internal data to exfiltrate to the web. So we have to construct it in a way, and the project that is listed in the mid-year is a project, and I'm sure Brian can speak in more detail to Brian Burnett, the other Brian, if you want to come on up, Brian. You haven't had a chance.
But again, many of these projects, and I think focusing back on the mid-year that we're here to talk about today, I believe the technology upgrades that have been long in coming and long talked about, but never, Brian's heard me say this before, technology is always the last thing, it's given a lot of lip service, but it's often the last thing, even the last thing that is funded And it's something that really can help us, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, take some leaps and bounds in terms of agency efficiency with what we're able to do in a constrained fiscal environment, because that's the reality of where we are going forward, not just this fiscal year, but looking out.
I would concur with everything the executive director said and to your statement as well. In the next few weeks, everyone in the agency will have access to generative AI, web-grounded generative AI at their desktop. That's part of our current productivity suite licensing will be coming out. The investments you see in the mid-year really focus on both bottom-up and top-down uses of AI. The ability for non-developers, non-coders, non-data scientists to use AI in their work. It could be program analysts in EXRR. It could be someone in OGC who needs to write a lot of legal documents, who will be able to use this, what I would call low-code, no-code AI. I'm trying to avoid using proper names here, there also is money available for I would say higher end, top down AI, where you have your data scientists and your data engineers being able to have tools in the cloud that will be available to them. Where previously, I guess last year, we did some of these efforts. You guys have all been briefed on some of the machine learning, particularly that EXRR did. We did that by optimizing cloud spend. So we had X dollars to spend. We really squeezed and saved money, invested it there. This is actually asking for money to continue those efforts, if you will.
Great, I appreciate that. On that note, I see on the document provided, there is a red line between projects 7 and 8, and perhaps if I can substitute Brian for Jim Jaholski.
We're a team for that one.
Oh, okay. Well,
we are the team for that one.
You're going to need both.
I'm going to spend probably 30 seconds pontificating. And first, I'll ask a question. Jim, what was the head count at the ports in 2020, either calendar year or fiscal year, roughly?
I'd have to.
Let me rephrase the question. You can get back with specifics. It was lower than it is today, even with significantly, I would characterize it, but perhaps that's unfair.
Yes, exactly. We were able, fortunately, to staff up with the ARPA funding that came. Yes.
And that was largely due to work that Commissioner Feldman did at the time. So I want to commend him for his leadership on that. Obviously, even with the numbers and the volumes, particularly given the end of the de minimis shipment and the e-filing rule, we could grow that probably exponentially, and without the aid of technology, still have deficits, correct?
Yes.
And the cloud migration for the RAM as part of the e-filing is an effort to help mitigate those deficiencies using the technology that's so important to getting there, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I have no further questions, but I do think that particular item is probably worth trying to get below that red line or above that red line. And again, I think we have to focus on efficiencies. We've talked about being data-driven for far too long without taking the requisite actions. And I'm hoping that this mid-year will be the big push. And again, thanks staff for the work on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Ziak. There has been a request for a third round of questions, but before we do, I believe it's prudent that the commission take a 5-minute recess. So hearing no objections, we'll recess for 5 minutes and reconvene for additional rounds of questions. This meeting of the Consumer Product Safety Commission will come back to order. We have had a request for a third round. We will proceed to a third round. Commissioner Honsarek, you are recognized for 10 minutes.
Thank you. Before I start my questions, I don't think that Commissioner Ziak meant to imply it, but I certainly wouldn't want the impression that I am somehow calling into question the hard work that the finance department does and the doing the best that you can under circumstances. My comments were more to actually, this is a senior management issue, to make sure that they have a good sense of what's happening in the agency, to make sure the contracts, the the needs of the departments and what can be allocated, unallocated funds are identified early. Honestly, in prior mid-years, oftentimes that was the process that we had going in, which was to ask everybody to take a hard look so that the unallocated balances were identified prior to the commission taking action upon this. And then, of course, as Ms. Wade said, as you get to the end of the year, you need to do that again. So it's really for the most efficient use of it, you do it throughout the year. Mid-year is the prime time to do it because then you can identify the unallocated use of funds. But this was not to say that anybody in finances is not doing their utmost to get the work done that they are. I'm trying to make sure that we're not managing in a way that is leading to more problems in the future. So that was just a comment. I didn't want to have anything imply that I was not happy with the finance team who was working extremely hard in difficult circumstances. Mr. Lyons, you talked about, and I think this is in response to Commissioner Trumka's questions, operating plans and the sort of the metrics that are in them. Is it your understanding that metrics really are what drives the work of the commission? The commission votes on the operating plans beginning of the year, and that is how staff is supposed to go forward and the work they're supposed to do.
Yes.
And to that end, I mean, I think I'm going to follow up on some of the questions that Commissioner Boyle sort of went on and has left me sort of confused. I mean, we had a lot of discussion during the operating plan of what the international programs office should be doing. And honestly, I was outvoted at the time because I thought that they should be doing more. But what was left was a majority of the commission and ultimately all five voting on the operating plan, laying out certain things that the international programs office needed to get done and the metrics that are out there. But it sounds like there's nobody in international programs at this point in time. What are your plans to achieve the specific metrics that were laid out in the operating plan? And do we need a special light item for programs to do contract work to get that done before the end of the year?
Yeah, I mean, the international programs at this point, what we're trying to do is have that carried by other parts of the commission. So Dwayne Ray is ably leading it, and he had a very, very successful meeting yesterday, my understanding, with the Israeli delegation. And there may be other meetings of that sort. But in terms of the metrics specific, I mean, Dwayne, maybe you should come up and maybe speak to the specific metrics of the international program.
And if you need, Dwayne, they're on page 25 of the operating plan.
I may have this information. My apologies. I think, as Brian mentioned yesterday, we did have a good meeting with the Israeli government. And I believe our metric for this year was to have 8 of those interactions. We've had 6, including yesterday. I think there's potential to keep that trend going for the remainder of the fiscal year. So I think for that one, that OP 116, I don't think that's it. You know, I think we're on track to potentially meet that metric. I think the next 2 metrics, 117 and 118, having to do with industry training, and form-based buyer training. We're not going to be able to do that this fiscal year, given our current resources. We did do some training this year, but likely not to meet those metrics in the remainder of the year.
And I'm not going to fully rehash the debate that we had back in the day. I mean, I think it's critical for us as an agency to train manufacturers on how to meet our standards. and to make sure that they know what rules they have to follow, because honestly, the best way to prevent injuries and deaths associated with consumer products is to make sure that the products themselves are made well and made consistent with our standards before they get into store shelves and in people's homes. Going after them through compliance, stopping them at the border is more happenstance, and by that time, oftentimes it's too late. So saying that you can't, this is mid-year, I think I would say, what do we need to do in mid-year to make sure that those do happen? Because that is the direction from the commission, and there's been no suggestion in the mid-year to change the metrics. So there's an obligation on staff to achieve those if it's possible throughout the year. So what would be the suggestion as to how we can hit those metrics?
I mean, I have to get back to you on a path to adjust things to do that. I don't want to necessarily speculate right now.
Well, maybe you can put together a proposal so that there's another project that we can vote on in mid-year, so that it would be able to achieve those metrics that are laid out in the operating plan. And I think that that's important overall. I mean, if there are metrics that are that you know that you're going to miss, for us to understand that, so we can see whether or not additional resources need to be put into different parts of the agency, or projects or contracts that are put together, so that you're able to do honestly what should be the goal of everyone, which is to achieve what's laid out in the operating plan. And speaking of which, I mean, I think another area that I've had some concerns about is really the small business office, and making sure that they can hit their metrics and they have the resources necessary. I mean, they are really a crown jewel of what we've done for product safety. And there are many people who have spoken really highly of the work that they do. That includes the regulatory robot. That includes a responsiveness that is really unusual, honestly, within the federal government, because people come say, I was really surprised that when I called the SBO office, somebody actually picked up the phone and got back to us. And I think in the past, it's been, within a day or two, the SBO has been able to provide small businesses with guidance on how to be able to make your products and make them safe, which is really, again, for me, an extremely important thing. Do it right first. Don't catch the problem in the future, because by then it's probably too late for somebody. Currently, what is the staffing in SBO, and are we able to achieve the metrics that are laid out in the operating plan?
At the moment, we've gone from 3 team members for SBO to 1. Thanks to the Herculean efforts of the 2 former staff members, we expect to make the metrics this year, but next year is a different story because we have lost 2/3 of capacity.
And those are the 2 metrics, which is domestic trainings and also the educational materials created for the e-commerce community.
Correct. So at the moment, the 2 former staff members conducted 8 outreach events before they were reassigned. Given our activities with e-filing and a few other activities, our remaining SBO expects to be able to meet, the 15 threshold for that particular metric. And the 2 pieces of content aimed at the small business community have been created and are posted. So again, we'll meet these metrics this year, but next year is a different story.
And with respect to response time, it's been, I think it's averaged every day or 2 in the past. Is that currently where we're at now that we're down to 1 person?
No, at the moment, the response time is probably lagged to a week
at least. What we have now is the same volume of calls coming in, probably more, thanks to some of the rules, some of the other initiatives like e-filing, but you now have 2/3 of the capacity lost. And so what the SBO is doing is kind of triaging those calls and trying to answer as many of the simple requests as possible, which means that those people who have more complicated queries that may take a long time have to wait longer. And the answers may not be as robust as they had been in the past. So it is definitely having an impact.
Thank you. I know that I'm out of time. I would just say, small businesses are the backbone of America, and I think we're treating them badly by forcing them to wait longer and putting people at risk as a result.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Commissioner Trumka.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just going back to a suggestion earlier, there was a question raised in response to some of my colleagues' questions as what's the appropriate scope of discussion for today? And I think it's important that we talk about what midyear is and what we noticed this public meeting for. Midyear is when we look at all the programs and we see what's working and where we're falling short, because we need to rebalance our focuses to where they can be most appropriately used. And that's come across today. So the entire operating plan is up for discussion, and that's what we're here to consider. And the public meeting notice covered that full scope. It said the matters to be discussed were the fiscal year 2025 operating plan alignment and mid-year review. So I'm glad to see that the conversation's been allowed to continue and that we are fully within the scope there. One other idea that I wanted to address was our port staffing. And it's great to hear that we are up when you compare right now to pre-pandemic levels when we were lower a long time ago. But we are down in terms of our port presence from a year ago. And we are down in terms of our reach to various ports from a year ago. And I look at our port presence as one-way ratchet. We are far below where we could be, where we should be, and we need to keep ratcheting that right back up. And so we shouldn't be thinking about going down. I ended the last question line asking about our NICE system, and I'll quickly revisit that. I made the point that maintaining our NICE footprint is necessary, but pursuant to the operating plan, growing it is very important too. Last year, we recruited 9 new hospitals into that system, and we described that in our operating plan as our greatest recruiting success in more than 20 years. We set a goal in the operating plan to keep that success rolling by recruiting another 9 hospitals this year, including in underserved communities. And as we step up to maintain this program, which I strongly encourage us to do, I want to make sure that we're keeping up those recruiting efforts too and hitting those directed goals as well. And I did want to ask quickly, CDC's falling off, and in terms of what the data collection will look like through NICE after that, we're still going to be collecting all the data that we at CPSC have been using for injuries from products in our jurisdiction. But no one's going to be collecting the other injury data that CDC was tracking, if I understand that correctly. So what was the CDC data that is no longer going to be tracked?
It's non-product injury related data. The specific line items, Dwayne Boniface, you want to give us the line items that there's a certain number of line items and types of non-product related injury data that they track. But
sure. The authoritative source for that would be CDC, but on their behalf, we've been collecting what's known as their all injury program. So capturing injuries outside of consumer products, as well as adverse drug events.
Can you give me some examples?
Pardon? So capturing, we had been capturing some workplace related incidents, incidents outside of a jurisdiction, including airlines and so forth.
Car crashes?
Car crashes, we have not collected through that
Suicide
program.
attempts?
Suicides were in that program.
Near drownings?
I think we should do the record. Can I suggest that we'll give you the list for the record?
Sure.
There's no reason to speculate when we have an exact list of
You can
of
follow with that
information.
list, but I think, the sense that I'm getting is that this isn't directly an us issue, but it is information that is useful to the American public. Hopefully CDC can step up, or someone can step up and figure out a way to keep tracking this information, because it is useful. A number of the proposed projects on the mid-year list contemplate the use of AI, which is certainly something I agree that we should be considering. And you raised earlier about how doing that responsibly as an important part of that, which I also very much agree with. Do we have a written policy on our use of AI?
We are putting that together, and Dwayne Boniface is in the final stages of developing that policy, I believe.
Yeah, we're close to finishing a draft of that policy, and we'll send it up through a review.
I know you don't like specific timelines, but do you have a sense of when we would get that?
I think we're looking to try to get that up this current fiscal quarter.
So what I would say to that is I think we need to see that before we sign off on any of these projects, because to be greenlighting a project when we don't know the policy in place and have the ability to consider what needs to be contemplated in that policy, we're putting a lot of trust in algorithms to keep Americans safe. And I think we need to agree on those rules to make sure these tools are safe, secure, and effective. So I would encourage you to get that to us as soon as you can if you want these projects approved that use this, that could make us more efficient with that, with the use of those tools. Item 6 on this list proposes the use of ChatGPT for documents of a sensitive and confidential nature, which you raised earlier. What functions do you want to be using that technology for under this proposal?
So we're first of all creating a capability, right? So the idea is that you're able to, inside your own domain, without it exfiltrating to the web, be able to analyze data. So in any of us that wants to look at our data and categorize it, develop write-ups of historical CPSC data, that wants to be able to sort through our artifacts faster and more effectively, we will be able to quickly get to that data without spending inordinate amounts of time doing research and analysis. So you could, if you ask a question and you have a question of our data or any kind of artifact, if it exists in our environment, in our information domain, you will be able to use this closed loop AI, generative AI, to get to that information faster. The number of different applications for it, I think, are as wide as your imagination, but it's fundamentally about working faster and more effectively. That's not to say that you can just trust what the AI algorithm generates, but this is the kind of work where you can pull the information and then validate it rather than doing raw research to figure out, hey, where does this or that report, where's this, an email? I mean, you could use it to summarize your emails. So you could do it to summarize your meetings. You could do any variety of things in a closed loop, our domain.
That seems like we could have some very useful functionality from that. So again, let me reiterate my urging that we get that policy up quickly so that we can consider that project. Item 13 is a children's product population study. What products would that cover?
I think that is Pam. Is that you? Dwayne. Sorry, Dwayne.
Yes, the covers a number of products, including some durable nursery products. Let me get back to you with the full list. It's a list of about 20 different products.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, please do get that list to the commissioners so we can take a look at that. Item 16 is an infant safe sleep campaign. Given that CDC has shuttered its infant safe sleep program, it does become important for us to step up and do everything we can in this space. This project only allocates $125,000. Do you know what CDC was spending on their Safe to Sleep campaign?
I do not.
I think we should see if we can figure that out, if we can figure out what they were doing, because to the extent we need to close a gap there from our sister agency, I am all ears on how we can do that. Item 15 is digital advertising, but it doesn't identify specific topics. Do we have topics identified that we'd want to cover in that?
We do. We've used digital advertising over the past few years to respond in real time to weather events and other sort of natural disasters, where consumers may need to be reminded of how to use generators safely to avoid CO poisoning. We've used digital advertising to support kind of our non-core campaigns, for example, water beads, things that come through at the last minute or that are not contemplated at the beginning of the fiscal year that may need a digital push to amplify our safety messaging. So the idea is that we would, have this money, obviously for CO, because there are growing number of weather events where that messaging is helpful, but also to support things like I&E campaigns, lithium-ion battery safety, additional baby safety sorts of things, fireworks, holiday, all of those things that don't fall into our kind of core safety campaign categories.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And that the first one you highlighted with CO poisoning risk after weather events from portable generators, that's a stopgap until we make those products safer. And so we do need to keep doing that until we are able to, which we heard earlier has been delayed. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Boyle, you're recognized.
Thank you. Ms. Springs, I think I'll just stick with you for a moment and follow up a little bit on your response to Commissioner Hohn-Sarek about the metrics for SBO. I guess I will say it doesn't surprise me in the least that your staff members that you're referring to were heroic and already have met their metrics. So I know their work well, and it doesn't surprise me. In fact, it puts me in mind of wanting to ask you, is it your experience that that's what staff does? They meet a metric and then pencils down, they don't do any work, or is the metric just really one? I know it drives one part of the work, or are there intangibles and a motivation beyond those metrics?
I would say that, the motivation is the mission. The SBO team, when they joined OCM, almost immediately embraced and understood what we do and their role in supporting our mission as a comms team. So, the SBO is, delivers benefits not just to the business community, but they help me with reporters who may need to understand how a rule works, because, plain English may not be plain English to reporters. So they, I think they're motivated by our mission, and they remain motivated and committed to supporting it.
Okay, I appreciate that. So would you say cutting the staff by 2/3 sends the wrong message then, because it's not just metrics, even though you meant the metrics?
I don't want to characterize, the rationale or the motivations, whether they're working in SBO or working in compliance. I have no doubt that they are committed to supporting the mission of the commission.
Oh, for
And
sure,
so,
these
yeah,
specific employees. I just meant
absolutely.
as an agency saying we are going to commit our resources to the small business community. We're saying that we're going to reduce it by that amount, and that sends us a certain message.
And
I won't put words in your mouth.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
Put it in my
yeah.
mouth.
I'll just say that, we remain committed to the small business community, and we will do whatever we can for as long as we can to ensure that they're supported.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And while you're up here, I did want to just ask you on the list of projects, we've asked the executive director whether any projects ended on the cutting room floor. And so since you're there, are there any projects that you were seeking to get funded that didn't make the list that is in front of us?
A few, including one, sorry. recall translations, which I know is dear to your heart. But I'm lucky in that I'm working with my colleague Brian Burnett on an AI/machine learning tool that's showing great promise. And so, I had asked for 100,000 as a contingency plan B, in case the tool isn't working, but it's showing great promise. So, it's on the cutting room floor, but I have no doubt that we will have a way to keep that translation going next year. We asked for money for a stock footage and video photo shoot. It's not that we don't have the capability in-house, it's the capacity and the bandwidth to actually get the content that we need. So that was on the cutting room floor, but we will carry on. And a hearing room upgrade, which was on the cutting room floor for various reasons that I think the executive director can speak to perhaps.
Okay, thank you. And going back to the Spanish translations, I do want to thank you and commend you and Mr. Burnett for the work that you did on the pilot. I think it looks very promising, and that there are some next steps outlined in the report, which I fully support. And maybe Mr. Burnett would come up on this too. I didn't see a direct reference to implementation in the mid-year proposal. So I'm just curious, is that because the cost is so minimal and that is just going to proceed? Or if you could address that, I appreciate it.
With the approval of the commission to move forward with the project, yes, the costs are really insignificant.
Well, that's what I was asking. I didn't see.
There's nothing there. No.
Okay.
We as I mentioned before, we have a reasonably large spend in our cloud environment, and the hundreds of dollars this will cost us, we'll be able to accommodate it within that platform.
So to the extent the commission comes forward with a proposal to amend the mid-year project, is what you're saying, that you didn't put forward a proposal to proceed, but you're expecting us to direct you? I'm just not clear.
Okay. I think in the report that you received, there was some question about whether the commission wanted to move forward with it. But since the mid-year is typically money related or funding related, it's not there. But I would love to see something from the commission that says we want to move forward with this based on the report that was submitted this week.
And just to be clear, if you look at last year's mid-year,
Yeah.
there was a revision of the mandatory standards table. There was
Okay.
also a alignment of metrics for compliance. So I know that's been argued today that it's just very specific to dollars. But if you look at last year's mid-year, that's actually not what we did. So just to,
Perfect.
I know it's somewhat new to you too. So.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Miss Waite, I wanted to just, thank you, Ms. Springs, I appreciate it. I wanted to get back to you just to clarify what you said about the grants position. Is that when you were talking about trying to, since there's a hiring freeze, you weren't able to hire, I just want to clarify that that's because it was just one person filling a position, and there's now a vacancy, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so Mr. Lorenz, that sort of brings to mind a recommendation that the IG has made repeatedly about succession planning, and particularly when there's an office where there's only one or two people. And so given the hiring freeze, given the critical vacancies, how are you thinking about the IG's recommendations and how, his repeated concerns about the risk presented by lack of succession planning at the agency?
It is not something that I have addressed in my first 60 days on the job, given some of the other priorities that we're dealing with. But I understand that succession planning is an important part of ensuring smooth transitions as people leave and depart the agency. So it is something that we should give some attention to. I agree with that, but it is not something that I have a developed plan on at this point in time.
Okay, thank you. And another area that I wanted to ask about what the plans to, I guess, fill the gaps are in the state and local outreach program. I think it's under compliance now. I don't know if Mr. Ray, you have any insight you could provide on how we are fulfilling that function?
Yeah, so we do have a recent retirement in that program. We have The field does quite a bit of support in that area, and for now, they've kind of filled that gap. We are going to have to reassess for next fiscal year.
How about this fiscal year?
Well,
It's being covered completely by the field?
right now, to the extent we're able to, it's being covered by the field. But we would have to reassess resources in that area, given our current environment.
Assuming we can't hire, which,
Correct.
I
Yes.
think there's not a guarantee that July comes and we're going to be miraculously, the freeze will miraculously lift. I don't think that's clear. Okay. And how about the econ department? I don't know if Mr. Boniface wants to answer that, but or if you're Mr. A, you can answer.
I mean, I think they're similarly situated with other groups that have vacancies that are, we're not able to backfill given the hiring freeze.
Has that affected our ability to, advance rulemaking, doing cost benefit analysis that's required?
It's not been raised to me as impacting that at this point, but if the other Dwayne has a view, I'm happy to let him.
Yeah, so the economics directorate has about 50% fewer staff than we were at about a year ago, due to retirements and so forth. They are currently able to keep up with the workload, but I think as Dwayne Ray noted, for FY26, we're going to have to look at some challenges there.
50% capacity, that staff is able to, to address all the rules that my colleague Commissioner Trumka addressed with you earlier, that's not going to be a problem in advancing all of those rulemakings in the short period of time before the end of the fiscal year.
So I think that the challenges that we've identified in advances in some of those rules are associated more with a process perspective. So again, getting data out via the notice of availability, getting that comment back, reviewing and considering those comments, those are where we have the greater challenges.
You're saying we're not going to get to the cost benefit analysis yet because of the other challenges.
Well, we're looking at a number of final rules. So those cost benefit analyses have been completed and put out for comment for the most part. So it's really a matter of seeing what kind of comment comes back.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate you coming up to the table. And I'm over. So I have one more round of questions, I think, Mr.
We can do another round.
Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Commissioner Ziak.
Thank you. I'll be brief. This way. I did not intend to suggest that anyone was saying that you were recognizing that what I thought was the case, that you were moving contracting along as it comes any given year. Contracting, when additional monies come up at the end of the fiscal year, can have that. So that was the answer. And can I have Ms. Springs come up? Question. I had a similar question since we're talking about international programs during the operating plan briefing about metrics measuring success. I got the answer last year from our former executive director that we didn't have the ability to measure the effect of training programs, which is why we had the robust debate that we did have during the operating plan about the effectiveness of our international programs. I frankly think I think there are other uses that those those funds could be used for. I think there are outsiders who can provide the training, but one of my big concerns is if you can't measure it, it's not worth doing. That was something boss used to tell me, Senator Voinovich, who ran a city, a state, and was the United States Senator. But Ms. Springs, one of the things that you mentioned in 15 digital advertising, and I'd be interested how we're measuring the success. Digital advertising provides OCM with concrete data and metrics to determine success. How do we do that with digital advertising? Are we seeing reductions in unsafe behavior versus areas that aren't getting the digital advertising, or are we measuring some other way?
So I wouldn't refer to it as behavior change, because if we're talking about, kind of in the moment news-driven events, we can't measure what people do with that information. What we can measure is the reach of our safety messaging. We know that we can reach X number, 10,000 people in a very specific region with safety messaging about carbon monoxide or whatever. We can't, we don't have the data or the ability to measure what they do with that information.
Right into where I was going to go with this.
Okay.
Ms. Lorenz and Mr. Burnett. One of the ways I was taught when I was studying was you can do controlled randomized experiments. And I'm wondering if with our digital advertising data, as you're looking at AI and you're looking at data collection, if we can start to do those sorts of tests where we have advertising in one geographic area similar to another geographic area where we don't, any way to measure, are we having a behavioral effect advertising in some manner or fashion? And would the opportunities presented by increased data, the use of AI and these technologies allow us to start to better measure those successes?
I mean, logically, yes. I mean, it's so how we would execute that. Maybe Brian already has ideas, but my suggestion is that we explore that and maybe come up with some ideas for how we.
And it's a longer term goal. And I understand for Ms. Springs, it's a challenge. It was a challenge for all of these metrics. And when I think as we gather and see increased amounts of data available, something that really would begin to measure bang for the buck. And that's important in an area. Thank you. That was my only question.
Thank you, Commissioner. I believe that there's a request for now a fourth round, which I'm happy to proceed to. Moving to a fourth round, Commissioner Hansarek, you are recognized.
Thank you. I will try to keep it to 4, but I can't guarantee that. I'd say going to project 1 on your list and trying to understand better, I would say that NICE data is extremely important, has been historically important for the agency and been used well. I do like the suggestion that Commissioner Trump has put forward in trying to divide up what is necessary to support the NICE hospitals and then these additional data ideas that you have. I do that for a couple of reasons. One, I would welcome Mr. Bonfils to tell us exactly what the difference is between having 77 hospitals and 64 hospitals. I know we've gotten down that far, and that has been a sort of crisis moment for the agency as we tried to push to make sure that the data that we're getting is fully reliable and useful for the purposes that we want, because oftentimes it's about not just number of hospitals, but where those hospitals are, and if you can take the integrity of the data that we're getting. And to that end, as you're looking at these other data sources, have you done an analysis of what the longitudinal studies will look like for the use of our data? Because most of the reports that we put out and the rulemakings that we do look at the data over time, and I'd want to make sure that the fidelity of that data is maintained. And how would these new sources potentially impact that?
And Dwayne, maybe you should come up. I can take this at a high level, right? Which is to say that, again, you're essentially buying decreased variance. For every hospital that you add, you're getting decreased variance. So the question is, what is it acceptable? What is an acceptable amount of confidence in what we deliver? And the answer, of course, is it depends on the product. So there are products that we can do with different levels of confidence. And as we get more granular in our analysis, we don't, having fewer hospitals becomes increasingly a problem. The way out of that could be to continue to add hospitals, to continue to add manual coding in those hospitals, to negotiate with hospitals that will participate in the program. That is one way of going about it. Another way to go about it is to look at medical encounter data at a much broader scale, and to look and to obtain that data working with our partners in the federal government, but also in the private sector, to get a much broader set of encounter data that would allow you to do much more granular studies. So, for example, right now we can't do a study across every state because we don't have hospitals in every single state. So our studies focus at a top level, the kind of analysis of where the hazards lie, but we can't do it by state. If we were going to do it by state, we could either add a lot of hospitals or we could take a different approach to the data pool that ends up in there. Now, I totally understand that for you to do your, longitudinal analysis, as you say, it needs to be consistent. I'm not sure, and this is, this is my opinion. I'm not sure that sticking to the same data year in and year out is really where we should go, because we are working with limited data that limits the kind of analysis that we can do around hazardous projects. We may have false negatives just because our data pool is relatively limited. The only way we're going to eliminate false negatives and really be able to do the kind of granular research that would lift our mission to another level is to go, I hate to use the term big data, but it is kind of going for a whole different strategy around the data that we use for analysis purposes. That will lead to some levels of inconsistency. That's probably not the right word, but that will lead to year-over-year comparisons that'll be hard to compare. But our analysis, which at the end of the day is how do we use data to identify hazardous products, that will be improved.
And don't get me wrong, I'm all for new sources of data, and to making our data as useful as possible. But maybe Mr. Boniface, can you comment to the extent that we're using this information, either in the reports and studies or rulemakings, if you shifted your data set to a completely different data set versus a NICE data, would you be able to do sort of longitudinal analysis off of that?
So certainly we have seen changes in the data collection, even within NICE over the years, changes in medical coding and so forth. Mr. Lenz has asked us to take a look at some alternatives. Again, looking for opportunities to do more efficient and so forth. And so as part of that, we're looking at a feasibility analysis. That feasibility analysis would include that longitudinal component. Again, we've worked that problem in the past, so I'm not as concerned about that. But we also certainly have to make sure that whatever data set we're looking as an alternative is a viable alternative. It's statistically representative. We rely on this data to make national estimates of injury patterns and so forth, and that it provides the data, that the specificity that allow us to identify and evaluate hazard patterns and trends.
And it's inappropriate for me to go into the legal implications of it, but I would like to understand the legal implications as well, to the extent that we're relying upon the data and the longitudinal impact of, we've looked at things like magnets over time and the decreases in death and injury associated with them, and what would that mean to our day? And we can talk about that at another point in time. But I would reiterate probably Commissioner Trumka's request. Can we break this out? Because there's the preserving what we have aspect of it, and there's the new data aspect of it. And they seem to be slightly different. And I would love the analysis that Mr. Boniface is doing before we take any dramatic changes.
Yeah, so we can break it out, but if we break it out, we need to start by this is what we would decide rather than you decide if we break it out. If we break it out, we will need to say, okay, what is the statistical variance at 62, 70, 80, and make a determination of we can live with 50, we can live with 60, 70, 80, et cetera, and then cut it off and then say, okay, this is how much we'd have for NICE, and this is how much we'd have to bring in additional data. To some extent, what I was hoping was that you would decide where you're comfortable in terms of the confidence levels in our reporting. Again, 62 is historically where the one bookend of our historical patterns of how many hospitals we've kept. 100 is the high end of it, and everything in between is a choice.
So I know my time is running down, and my colleagues want to get out of here. So I would say maybe it's a misunderstanding between looking at the way that the project is written. The way I read it, it provides full discretion to staff to make that determination because it's funding both at the same time, and I would have concerns about that. So maybe we can reach a combination or agreement. On number 7, when you're talking about AI, Commissioner Trumka asked a lot of questions. I thought those were good questions, but I was wondering, is this an entirely closed system? What are the privacy implications of that? Is any of the data that's in the agency going to be going outside the agency? Would it be used to train GPT outside, or is this Brian is leaning forward behind you to wanting to answer that?
Yeah, and I'm sure he can, and I think I understand this one, but come on up, Brian, and we'll do it together. But the idea here is that when you do this, you do take safeguards that it doesn't leave your enclave. So you benefit from the learning that's taking place on the web, but your data does not leave and does not go into the learning model on the outside. And that's a construct. And I believe that's exactly how you constructed it to work.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. And one other thing, if I could bring one other point to the table, is that if you look at surveys, you see that 77% of people use AI tools, public AI tools, for their work. And so one of the things by offering these closed loop AI tools internally is we hope to stop people from using personal AI tools to do their job. I don't think that statistic doesn't count us. We're people. And so they can simply use those tools. It's called taking your data to AI, not bringing your personal AI to work. And so by offering these closed loop solutions, we are really hoping to forestall that at our agency.
And we can get into more detail, but just want to make sure the privacy of the data and all of our data is being treated consistent with our statutory obligations.
We're very conscious of this, and we will align with the AI policy, but the approach that we're taking is very much in line with approaches that are best practices, best in breed for organizations that want to use generative AI, but they don't want their information to exfiltrate to the general population. So if you work with sensitive government information, you just can't you can't take your data and put it on ChatGPT because it will eventually exfiltrate out there. And so this is a construct that was designed to address that exact challenge. And It is something that we're not beta here. Agencies are taking this approach. We're following in their lead, and it's best practice.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I recognize that I let that conversation go over time, but I did so because it's an important conversation, and I'm glad we were able to have it. But that's a courtesy that I'm prepared to extend to the rest of my colleagues. Thank you very much, Commissioner Trumka. You are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To put a fine point on the request that you heard Commissioner Hohensarik and I asking about on that number one project on NICE hospital data, I think what I'm suggesting is Project 1, 1.8 million to keep all funding. Project 2, what you're talking about. And so I'd like to see some text on page to see what you describe that project as with some greater detail and what amount of funding you'd want to put towards it on its own.
I think what we can do we put it all together because you're right, we want some flexibility, and we think that you would want us to be flexible in terms of how we approach this. But what we can do is we can definitely have a 60 hospital option, a 70 hospital option, a 77 hospital option. We can talk about the different costs of each and how much is left over for other prototyping of data approaches.
Fine if you want to do the different ones. I'm only asking for the 77 hospital approach and the other data sources you're talking about.
That's 1.8 and 200,000. That's
Okay.
1.8 and 200,000.
Well, I'm also suggesting you don't need to constrain yourself to the 2 million price tag you put to both.
I
So,
see.
so think about that other project, what you'd actually want towards it, and maybe there you could give us some different range levels on that separate option.
Okay.
Mr. Burnett, you said you wanted to commission direction, move forward on your translation project. No question for you. You've got my approval. If you want something more formal from us, let's figure out how we do that to make sure you can move forward on it, because it's great work that you're doing there and important work. Ms. Springs, you talked about stock footage for a photo shoot. Can I ask you what we'd be shooting and what cost element is associated with that? And I ask because I've heard repeatedly from folks in the public health space that, hey, we want to talk about safe infant sleep. There are no stock images. We're reusing the same one stock image to find a safe environment with the baby sleeping in it. So is that one of the areas we would address there?
Absolutely. That's definitely one of the areas where we see a lot of opportunity. One of my colleagues brought to my attention that we actually don't have a stock footage image of a carbon monoxide detector.
We should.
So exactly. So, we've done this sort of thing before. A few years ago, there was I believe prior to my arrival, there was a stock footage shoot that was approved, and it featured individuals with disabilities. We find that these kinds of images that we produce are not only used by us, but used by other organizations, helping us to, socialize our messaging. So, there's a lot of opportunity here for us to, refresh the stock images that we use. We can't get it all on Getty or iStock. We need to create some of this content ourselves.
That's a really great point. And you make another great one that we need to make this publicly available to anybody else who wants to talk about our safety message. So can you get us a description of that project and a dollar amount you'd want allocated to it for our consideration?
Yeah, I'll take a look at the dollar amount that we proposed, which I believe was $375, and we'll work to refine that.
Okay, thank you. Item 19 on the list is for outdoor advertising. Which hazards would you want to address with that, and are there specific populations you're targeting with that idea?
Yeah, so we launched an outdoor advertising campaign a few years ago that was targeting Native American population in the Southwest, thanks to Chairman Feldman's efforts. And we found that it was a really effective tool to get our messaging out to communities that may have issues accessing digital content. We also know that ATV safety in rural communities is an issue, and they may also not be digital citizens. And so we're looking at specific communities based on the hazard, ATV, CO safety, baby safety, along with access to digital content, which is where we tend to devote our efforts.
Okay. Excellent. Item 17 is to allow our field staff to get back to work doing community outreach and grassroots work. This is normally bread and butter work for our field staff. Since January, how many outreach activities has field staff conducted, and where do we compare to historic levels in that space?
I would have to get back to you on that. I don't have a specific number. I do know that, as you said, kind of boots on the ground is how we get our messaging out, and, forming relationships and engaging with communities at the local level. Trusted messengers is very important for our efforts in OCM. I'm happy to get back to you on that.
Well, I appreciate that. And I know part of that's comms. I know you're doing great work specifically getting out with children's museums, trying to get people where they are with a message that's useful to them. But I'm really asking about the field staff portion of that. And if there's anybody else who can answer that. Okay, Dwayne Ray is shaking his head no, and nobody else can get back to me on that right now, but I do appreciate.
We will get back to you. We just can't do it right now.
No,
We
I
don't
know.
have it.
And I appreciate that. So let us know where we're at and how it compares to historic levels there. So I guess overall, as I look through these proposed projects, given the savings we're realizing, I believe we're going to end up with significantly more funds available for allocation than the 3.5 million estimate that this proposal contemplates. It may not be taking into account several other known savings. I mean, we've given back unused office space and saved over $700,000 there. We were able to do $400,000 of redaction work in-house that we had planned on paying a contractor for. There's 1.1 million, and maintaining our current reduced staffing level frees up an additional 2.4 million. So 3.5 in addition to 3.5 could get us to at least 7. And I'd like to ask staff to quickly come back. I've asked for some examples of this today about other projects, but I'd like staff to quickly come back to us with other proposed project ideas to consider for prioritization as funds do become available, as we get a better view of what that's actually going to look like. And with the staffing constraints on the agency, I am concerned that we're being forced to fall short in several critical areas. There's no efficiency in cutting jobs here, and I think we need to correct any shortfalls. Thank you to the staff. Thank you for the amazing work that you're doing. We've highlighted a number of those areas where we're doing great things today. Hang in there. Keep doing everything you can to keep America safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Commissioner Boyle.
Thank you. Mr. Lorenz, have any contracts that were in place pursuant to the FY25 operating plan been canceled or otherwise altered?
We need to ask Annette to maybe answer that question specifically.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
I know I said good morning. We started. Good morning.
That's right. So there were 5 consulting contracts that were terminated this fiscal year. The proposed savings that's not realized, as they're still in negotiation, is $246,000 for fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 23. $50,000. Of course, those prior year funds are not returned to the agency, they're returned to the Treasury.
Okay. You say consulting. Can you give me a little bit more detail on what the consulting was?
So I'm going to turn this over to Dwayne Ray, if you don't mind, and he can give you the, yes. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the majority of those contracts were the work that was on with organohalogens that we had issued previously, and those were terminated.
Tell me why.
It was just part of the review for of contracts that we received through, I think it came through GSA.
And what has the impact on agency work been?
These were more research related on the OFRs, and I think we also didn't get any additional funding. So it was kind of carryover funding from last year. So I'm not sure that there was same focus on that area of work.
I don't have it in front of me, but I'm pretty sure there were metrics in the operating plan on some kind of report. There is work that,
Yep.
is that what's going to happen to that work?
I think that is going to happen. That report is going to happen.
Out the contracting input just by staff? Is that,
It'll be a staff report.
okay, and what's the shortfall not having the contract then?
I don't know that there is one.
Well, that would beg the question of why we have the contract. So,
Well, there is, it's research. I'll just say that.
that's what the contract dollars, there were 5 contracts for the organo health.
Correct.
Okay. Office, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, so as Mr. Ray noted, we will bring that, it's a status report, milestone status report to the commission. We'll just have less of an information base to draw upon as a result.
Okay, will there be a section reflecting what is not included that would have been included had we had the work completed with the contract that was in place and canceled?
Yeah, we will characterize sort of planned targets versus where we ended up at as part of that status report.
I appreciate that. Mr. Lorenz, has any travel been suspended or canceled?
There has been some limits put on travel, but there's also been exemptions to travel. So it's a
Can you
mixed bag.
characterize what's been canceled and what exemptions are in place?
Yeah, I think Annette is in a better position to go through the details on that. Okay, Casey.
Thank you.
Yes. So can you repeat the question, please?
I'm just trying to understand whether there's been a travel ban or a suspension of travel by agency staff. And I think Mr. Lorenz said yes and no, that there's been some and that there have been exceptions for others. I'm just trying to understand where those exceptions have been for.
We're exercising caution on travel, so we're strictly opting to proceed on the premise of, is it necessary?
Mhm.
So, and being in line with using the resources effectively, usually one of the first things you kind of reduce is travel.
Okay.
But that's kind of the limitation of where there are. So those are exceptions. If there's a need to travel for mission necessity, those exceptions are being made.
Can I just get an example of what that would be? So
our compliance and field investigators, if they need to travel to perform the safety work, public safety work, they are able to do so.
travel.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I was going to try to flag you, Mr. Boniface, before you sat down, because I did want to ask you about voluntary standards travel and whether staff, thank you, Ms. Evans, whether staff has, that's been limited.
We have had reductions in staff travel, trying to gain efficiencies of virtual travel. However, we have sent people, particularly where there was a strong need. Great example is the recent ASTM juvenile product meetings in West Conshohocken, where we sent a couple of staff to be there in person.
But you did say there have been more of an emphasis on virtual meetings.
Correct.
Consistent with the return to office ethos that, working under?
I think it is. What we're trying to do is we're in an environment with reduced resources. We're trying to maximize the effective utilization of those resources. So if there's an option for virtual participation and we don't see the added benefit of in-person, then we'll make that trade.
I appreciate this, and this isn't a question to you, but I would again comment that we are fully funded for the operating plan and we don't have reduced resources, at least for this fiscal year. So I appreciate it's a comment, not a question, but thank you for your answer. Okay, and just to go through quickly, the projects, Mr. Lorenz. I noticed that for the ports, there isn't a priority project to enhance enforcement as a result of the closing of the de minimis loophole. And I'm wondering, what the impact has been of closing the loophole, what the plans are, and why there isn't anything on the project list to specifically address the change in the de minimis loophole.
Yeah, I mean, it just simply wasn't, staff did not elevate. So the way the process worked is that staff made recommendations to elevate funding requests where they thought that they could not accomplish their mission and goals with the money that they already had. So I see Jim is here, so thank you. The cavalry has arrived.
I would say the project relating to moving RAM to the cloud would address that. Increased data relating to the closing of the elimination of de minimis exemption is going to create more entries that'll funnel through the RAM. E-filing, increased data as well. So moving the RAM to the cloud will give us better capability to be able to manage that.
That project entry too, first, where it's all's on the list, it was surprising to me how far down the list it was. And is that a one-time expenditure?
That is, Commissioner.
Okay, so then I guess this is also to Jim. I'm puzzled by that a bit because of the long-term resources that are going to be needed to support e-filing and the RAM, and why it would only be a one-time funding. I guess maybe wait, hang on.
Sure.
Because I understand that it had been funded through ARPA. That's now expiring, and you and I have had this dialogue that there is. I just want to know what the plan is. E-filing is now a requirement. It's no longer a pilot, and so I appreciate your answer specifically for this one-time funding that sounds like a Band-Aid to me, take care of the de minimis, but the bigger problem seems to me the long-term funding. So if I would ask Jim to answer this.
Yeah, so I think there are two issues here. There's the RAM moving to the cloud and the capability to be able to manage the data that we're going to be receiving. The other aspect, and I think these are some of the conversations that we've had, have been around the support for the trade relating to questions that are going to come in relating to some policy issues that our office will address. Also support just general, what we call tier one support, people that are having issues establishing an account, resetting their password, things like that. Those are going to be handled through Exit. So the plan is, I believe there is ARPA money that is available to be able to fund that project management support beginning at the end of this fiscal year through next fiscal year.
Right, but the issue is the long term. This is not if this works the way we want it to, it is going to be for many years. And so, the long-term funding is an issue that needs to be addressed. Would you agree?
I would. We do anticipate ongoing funding. This is a project that will impact a large number of importers, and the agency will need to be able to provide support. We're hoping that as the project matures and this requirement is in place, that the level of support that we anticipate needing for, say, next year will reduce over time because this will become more common practice.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Just have a couple of other questions. I think this has been asked, at least asked in generally on the on the audit liaison support position, Ms. Waith. Is that because we just lack staffing? Just on a high level, why do we need that contract? And can you explain what that is? And is it because of staffing deficits at the agency?
So that support is needed. We are trying to build additional tool sets for the staff to be able to use going forward. So it's being efficient with all of the audit requests we receive, which range between 180 requests, and it can grow substantially by the end of the year. So it's to continue building the tools that we need to fully execute in the futures.
So it's supporting current staff. It's not in lieu of other staff?
No, it's supporting current staff.
Oh.
And the part of that too is also making sure that staff are trained to use the tool going forward.
Appreciate that. And then-
Commissioner Boyle, we're going to have a fifth round. Thank you very much.
I was in taking your offer to go on, so, but I didn't.
We've
realize-
since had a request for a fifth round, so we're going to be, I assure everybody, we'll get to every question
Okay.
and more.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Commissioner Ziak.
No questions.
Concluding the fourth round, let's proceed to a fifth round. Commissioner Honsarik, you are recognized.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Just a comment following on from my other fellow, to the extent that there's needs to be voice support for translations. I would voice support for continuing the project on the brief the brief that you gave out there. So trying to take a look at where you started, Mr. Lenz. Obviously, we are about 5 months out from the end of the fiscal year. By the time we get done with this mid-year, we'll be about 4 months out at this point in time. If I understood correctly, there are a number of offices, like the Office of Compliance, that has spent about 25% of its projected budget, and now has been given the rest, is given leave to do the other 75%. Do you have a sense of what did they save up for? What's the 75% that they're going to be doing?
Well, Casey is probably better position to talk about how the money is used there.
So when we issued out the allowances for to all the program offices, it was to execute their budget in line with the op plan. So they are right now executing what they had advised that they were going to use the funds for.
Partial, my question is to understand, obviously, what you say you can do at the beginning of the year and what you can do with looking down, last 5 months is probably very different. So similarly, with respect to, the ports, about 25% of the money has been spent, and now there's 75% more. So I'm trying to get a sense of what that spend is to determine whether or not, two reasons for the mid-year. One, what are the allocated resources going to be? And then two, if there's things that are being planned that the commission thinks would be a better use of those funds, we could reallocate. So I don't know, Jim, if you can talk. We're talking about 75% has yet to be spent. What is that money going to?
Yeah, happy to give a little sense. So generally within our office budget, we set aside money, a fairly large amount of money for replacement of field screening equipment, XRFs, FTIRs. We have not initiated any purchases of those this year. We're in conversations now about how to leverage that money, to go into Commissioner Boyle's point, to be able to utilize some ARPA funding that's available, along with contributing from our office budget, to be able to provide that support, the support to the trade that would be needed from our office and from Exit. So we've got some ongoing conversations. But so that unexpended portion of our budget right now, that is sort of how we have identified that money to be spent.
So personally, the equipment, those are things that you can project that you're probably going to use most of the money that's been allocated to you under the operating plan.
Correct. Yes, we have a plan to use all of our 600,000, I think, office space for this year.
This goes to a more general question, Mr. Lyons. There's some executive orders out about contracting, things along those lines. Are the contracts being, obviously they got to go through finance, we've got to be consistent with FARs. We got to be consistent with lots of other things. But are they getting approved by OMB or anybody outside the agency before they're being completed?
No.
Great. That is good news because that could slow things down as well. So obviously we'll see what happens, and hopefully people will be able to use the funds that they're at on the non-personnel side. On the personnel side, I know we had a lot of back and forth conversation, and this way that I think understand that we always set aside for liabilities. I would say I'd go back to there are the unanticipated ones. Somebody leaves and they cash out their salary for the vacation and other things for the end of the year. Those are completely unanticipated, and we need to reserve funds for that. And then there's the ones that are within the control of the agency itself. Things like VSIP, things like RIFs themselves. I certainly would say from my perspective, that is a bad use of funds to go down that path of doing VSIP or doing RIFs. And I think if others feel the same way, there is no liability that would have to be reserved for at that point in time because the commission chooses not to do so. That's not needed. And that would bump up the funds that we're talking about that's potentially available. So, I would look to say, look to you, Mr. Lorenz, as we're thinking about how many projects we can do. What do we need to do? Some of the things we've talked about in the past about international programs and ability to achieve the metrics that have been put forth in our operating plan that the staff works towards are important to see if there are additional projects out there that really should be available. And we all understand that the projects don't necessarily mean that they will actually be funded. It is contingent on the availability of funds. But I would note the last mid-year we did, because finance is conservative, which I totally support, the line was drawn somewhere in the middle, and we cleared the entire list of mid-year projects last year. I worry that we're starting now with some assumptions that would put us down deeper. And so I would say, to the extent that you can, be responsive to the requests that you've gotten today, but an additional $5 million in projects from the staff to make sure that we're not in the position of having to do another end of the year instead of a mid-year, or something else along those lines would be useful to have. And in that process, it would be useful to have the regular briefings as well, like do weekly, but really focused in on sort of where we are in terms of assessing the different divisions on the use that they're going to be having with their funds, and whether or not they're going to use it all, and whether that's going to come back, so that we are in a good position to be able to use all the funds that have been made available to the agency, because we are the shepherds of those funds in the end of the day. I was pleased that we were fully funded this year, and I'm glad that we have a plan to use all that money through the year, because it's always a balance too. We need to be able to figure out how best to protect the American people and ensure that there are safe products out there in store shelves and coming in from overseas through e-commerce, and how to stop the bad products that are out there. So I think it is useful to make sure we are in a position to use all the funds that are provided in the most efficient way possible going forward. And although the chairman talked of a more muscular agency, an efficient agency, and much of what I've heard today, unfortunately, sounds like we have an extremely understaffed agency. People are sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul. You're taking people out of IP because there are people missing over in compliance. You're taking people out of one department to do something else. There are open questions as to whether or not we can spend the $4 million in grant funds because we don't have a grants person right now and are frozen, and maybe others can do that, but maybe not. And so we need to have these plans given how thinly staffed we are at this point in time. So I look forward to going through the mid-year process and to working with you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. We heard an assertion today that expenditure of funds on VSIP is not an efficient use of funds. Could you get back to us with a list, please, of how many VSIP separations occurred in the prior fiscal year?
We will do so.
Yes. Thank you very much. Commissioner Boyle. Excuse me, Commissioner Trumka.
Nope, I have no fifth round pick in this draft, so on to Commissioner Boyle. Thank you.
Commissioner Boyle, you're recognized for 10 minutes.
Okay, it's too late in the day to get back with a quick sports answer, so I'm just going to move on. My brothers would be very disappointed in me, but what can I tell you? I'm tired. I do just have a final question for you, Mr. Lorenz, on the NICE program that you're proposing. I absolutely agree it needs to be separated. I did not think that combining the two concepts was a viable option. That said, and you may have answered some of this in response to Commissioner Cohen-Sarek, it wasn't clear to me, or maybe it was actually Mr. Boniface, what due diligence had been done on the front end to even come up with a proposal, or are you saying you need to do the due diligence? Because, getting data from Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services or commercial health care plans, that there are so many issues that raises in my mind, and it's unclear to me whether all those things have been worked out, or you're saying you need funds to work them out.
That's correct. I think we need funds to work them out to some extent. We have certainly considered different sources of data, but we don't yet have a plan in place that to augment what we're doing with NICE. We have some theoretical, we have ideas about how we would go about it, but those ideas have not been turned into a plan.
Okay, so that's what the proposal would be, some kind of plan, which explains why, I think the entry as written was a non-starter, that was either continue with NICE or develop a plan, and that seems to be a non-starter. But it sounds like there's consensus that you need to go back to the drawing board on that, and so I look forward to that. I will just reiterate the various pieces of information that we need. I hope that you can get back to us quickly. You've been asked for a lot of information from the dais. I mean, I do feel like there was a sense among some perhaps that this was just a checklist of the projects that you all put forward. And that is not what today's exercise is and hasn't been in the past. A lot of times we do focus on those projects, but it really is a moment to step back and evaluate where we are as an agency in terms of staffing, in projects, in mission execution. And really, it's a tool for management, it's a tool for the commissioners, and it's a tool for the public. And so to the extent that there was a sense that it was a much more narrow exercise, I really want to underline that it's not. And I will, again, underline what has already been said by my colleagues. We're fully funded. And the responses today, you would not know that. If you were sitting as an objective person who just walked in the room, you would not know that this agency was fully funded in March, and that we had an opportunity to execute our program that we put together in November. You would have thought that we had half the funding and that we were struggling to put things together. And there's no reason for it. We were fully funded. The future may present something else. I don't know. But what I do know is that this year we were funded and we should have 534 employees working. We shouldn't have Dwayne Ray doing 75 jobs or anybody else going from one room to another with a different hat on. We are better. And so I appreciate the presentation, but I would like to ask you to go back to the drawing board and look at what it is we're asking you today. And it's a mid-year review of where we are at this agency, what we should be doing in the context of the money that we've been given by Congress, which has been a full funding level. So I thank you so much to all the staff. Ms. Waite, I appreciate you especially stepping into this role. It's super difficult. And I really appreciate all that you did and your staff and all the different hats various staff are wearing, depending on which seat they're in. So thank you very much. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Ziak.
Thank you to all the staff here and everyone who contributed. I have no further questions.
I would ask if there's a request for yet an additional round. Hearing none, I too want to thank staff for the briefing today and to the commissioners for their participation. I would ask if anybody has any legal questions that would necessitate entering into a closed session. Hearing none, this briefing is adjourned. Again, thank you to the Office of the Secretary, the Office of the Executive Director, OCM, our General Counsel, Compliance, Facility Services, everybody that was involved in facilitating today's briefing. This meeting's adjourned.